The strobing red and blue lights painted the empty street in violent colors as Officer Derek Ramsey smiled into the darkness. Another easy target, another quiet night, another nobody who'd take the fall without a fight. He'd planted evidence before. He'd lied under oath before. He'd destroyed lives before. But tonight, the exhausted woman in scrubs standing beside her car wasn't some defenseless civilian. She was Major Elena Kovac, a decorated combat medic who'd survived 3 tours in war zones, and she'd just watched him slip a bag of narcotics from his vest into her vehicle. He'd picked the wrong soldier. Before we dive into this story, I want to ask you something. Stick with me until the very end to see how this unfolds. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far these stories travel across the world. The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when Elena Kovac finally pulled out of Riverside General Hospital's employee parking lot. Her navy blue scrubs were marked with dried blood from an arterial bleed she'd managed in the ER 2 hours earlier, and her shoulders ached from 16 straight hours of trauma cases, overdoses, and one gunshot victim who'd coded twice before she'd brought him back. The streets of Millerton, Pennsylvania were empty at this hour, just scattered streetlights throwing yellow pools across cracked asphalt and the occasional flicker of a television through drawn curtains. She should have been thinking about the hot shower waiting at home, or the leftover Thai food in her refrigerator, or maybe just the blessed silence of her apartment. Instead, her mind kept circling back to the 22-year-old Marine she'd lost on an operating table in Helmand Province 7 years ago. The one whose face she still saw sometimes in the fluorescent glare of the ER. Combat had taught her that some memories never fade. They just wait in the shadows until you're too tired to keep them out. The red and blue lights exploded in her rearview mirror without warning. Elena's pulse didn't spike. Her hands didn't shake. She simply checked her speedometer, 32 in a 35 zone, and eased her silver Honda Accord toward the curb in front of a residential street lined with darkened houses. She'd been pulled over exactly 3 times in her life, all for minor issues, all resolved with a warning. She kept her registration current, her insurance valid, her inspection up to date. Whatever this was, it would be quick. The officer who approached her window took his time. She could see him in her side mirror, a stocky figure backlit by his cruiser's high beams, one hand resting on his service weapon as if she were a felony stop instead of a tired healthcare worker heading home. When he finally reached her door, his flashlight beam hit her face like a spotlight. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation, just a flat command delivered in a voice that expected immediate compliance. Elena kept her hands visible on the steering wheel. "May I ask why you pulled me over, officer?" The beam moved down to her scrubs, then back up to her face. License, registration. Now. She'd dealt with aggressive personalities before, drunk patients, panicked family members, shell-shocked soldiers who'd forgotten how to trust anyone in uniform. The key was always the same. Stay calm, stay professional, don't escalate. She reached slowly for her purse, narrating each movement. "I'm reaching for my wallet now. It's in the bag on the passenger seat." "Stop." Her hand froze. "Step out of the vehicle." Elena felt the first real thread of unease work its way down her spine. This wasn't standard procedure for a traffic stop. This wasn't even close. "Officer, I haven't." "Out. Now." She opened the door and stood, her legs stiff from the long shift, her body screaming for rest she wouldn't get. The officer, his nameplate read Ramsey, positioned himself at an angle that kept her pinned between her open door and the car's frame. Up close, she could see the cold assessment in his eyes, the way he was sizing her up like a predator evaluating prey. She'd seen that look before, in forward operating bases and field hospitals, on the faces of men who enjoyed having power over people who couldn't fight back. "What's your name?" Ramsey asked. "Elena Kovac. I'm a registered nurse at Riverside General. I just finished my shift and I'm heading home." "Kovac?" He drew out the syllables like he was tasting something unpleasant. "That foreign?" "My father's family is from Croatia. I was born in Pittsburgh." "You seem nervous." "I'm not nervous, I'm tired. It's been a long day." Ramsey's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Long day doing what?" "Working. In the emergency room, saving lives." She kept her voice level, but something in her tone must have landed wrong because his expression hardened. "You got a smart mouth for someone who's about to have a very bad night." The threat hung in the air between them, naked and ugly. Elena's military training kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, identify the threat level, calculate your options. She was alone on a dark street with a cop who'd clearly decided she was a problem before he'd even turned on his lights. No witnesses. No backup. No witnesses except... Her eyes flicked to the house across the street, where a small security camera was mounted under the eave. Its lens pointed directly at the roadway. Ramsey caught the glance. His jaw tightened. Turn around. Hands on the vehicle. Am I under arrest? You will be if you don't shut your mouth and do what I tell you. Elena turned, placed her palms flat against the Honda's roof, and focused on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and controlled. The same technique she'd used when the mortars started falling on her field hospital in Kandahar. The same technique she'd used when she was elbow deep in a soldier's chest cavity, trying to clamp a torn artery while the tent walls shook from nearby explosions. Ramsey's hands moved over her body in a pat-down that was more aggressive than necessary, lingering in places that had nothing to do with searching for weapons. She stared straight ahead and counted backwards from 100 in her mind, a trick she'd learned from a psychiatrist after her second deployment. When he finally stepped back, she heard him moving toward her car. "What are you doing?" she asked without turning around. "Searching your vehicle for contraband." "You don't have probable cause for a search." "Well, I've got reasonable suspicion that you're involved in criminal activity. That's all I need." Elena listened to the sounds behind her, the creak of her car door opening, the rustle of him moving things around in her front seat, the deliberate nature of each movement. She'd worked enough trauma cases involving police evidence to know what a legitimate search sounded like. This wasn't it. This was theater. This was someone creating a narrative. "Well, well, well," Ramsey's voice dripped with false surprise. "What do we have here?" She turned her head just enough to see him straightening up from her passenger seat, holding a clear plastic bag filled with white powder. Her stomach dropped. "That's not mine." "They always say that." He held the bag up to his flashlight, examining it with exaggerated care. "Looks like cocaine to me, maybe fentanyl. Either way, that's a felony trafficking charge. You're under arrest." The world seemed to tilt slightly, reality bending around the impossibility of what was happening. Elena had spent 3 tours in combat zones, had held dying men while bullets cracked overhead, had made life-or-death decisions in split seconds with shrapnel raining down around her. But nothing in those experiences had prepared her for the surreal horror of watching a police officer frame her for a crime in the middle of a quiet American street. "That bag was not in my car," she said quietly. "And we both know it." Ramsey moved closer, invading her space with practiced intimidation. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying that bag didn't come from my vehicle. I'm saying you need to be very careful about what happens next." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. From someone who's been through enough investigations to know how they work." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or the first hint of uncertainty. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the arrogant confidence of a man who'd done this before and gotten away with it. "Turn around! Hands behind your back!" The handcuffs bit into her wrists, cold metal against skin that still smelled faintly of hospital antiseptic. Ramsey walked her to his cruiser with one hand gripped tight on her upper arm, shoving her into the back seat with enough force to make her head bounce off the door frame. The cage separating the front and back seats smelled like vomit and fear, and dozens of other people who'd sat exactly where she was sitting, wondering how their lives had gone so wrong so fast. As the cruiser pulled away from the curb, Elena twisted in her seat to look back at her Honda, still sitting under the streetlight with its driver's door hanging open. And there, mounted on her dashboard where Ramsey apparently hadn't thought to look, was the small camera she'd installed 6 months ago after another nurse had been carjacked in the hospital parking lot. A dash cam that had recorded everything. She settled back against the seat and closed her eyes, her racing thoughts already organizing themselves into the systematic approach she'd learned in the military. Evidence, timeline, witnesses, chain of custody. Ramsey had made his first mistake when he assumed she'd be too scared or too ignorant to fight back. He'd made his second when he didn't check for cameras. She wondered how many more mistakes he'd make before this was over. The Millerton Police Department's booking area looked like every other small-town station Elena had ever seen. Scuffed linoleum floors, fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps, and the faint smell of burnt coffee mixing with industrial cleaning solution. The desk sergeant, a gray-haired man with a face like weathered leather, barely looked up as Ramsey marched her through the front entrance. "What have we got?" the sergeant asked, his voice carrying the bored tone of someone who'd processed 1,000 arrests and expected 1,000 more. "Felony trafficking," Ramsey announced, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Found 2 kilos of cocaine in her vehicle during a routine traffic stop. She got belligerent when I tried to question her." Elena said nothing. She stood with her spine straight and her shoulders back, the posture drilled into her during basic training and reinforced through years of standing at attention in front of superior officers. The sergeant's eyes moved over her scrubs, lingered on her face, then dropped to the ID badge still clipped to her chest. She saw the moment he registered the small American flag pin next to her hospital credentials, the tiny gold star that indicated veteran status. "Name?" he asked her directly, cutting across Ramsey's monologue. "Major Elena Kovach, United States Army Reserve, retired, currently employed as a trauma nurse at Riverside General Hospital." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The sergeant's expression shifted from bored to alert in the span of a heartbeat. Another officer who'd been filling out paperwork at a nearby desk looked up sharply. "Major?" the sergeant repeated. "I served 3 combat tours as a forward surgical team leader, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I separated from active duty with an honorable discharge in 2019, and I've worked at Riverside ever since. I have never been arrested, never been accused of any crime, and I have an active security clearance through the Department of Defense because I occasionally consult on military medical training programs." She delivered the information in a flat, professional tone that carried no emotion and invited no argument. Just facts, laid out like evidence at a court-martial. She watched the sergeant's face as he processed what she'd told him, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. This wasn't some random civilian he could process and forget. This was a decorated combat veteran with institutional connections, and that meant complications. Ramsey must have sensed the shift because he stepped forward aggressively. "I don't care if she was a 4-star general. I found 2 kilos of narcotics in her vehicle. She's a trafficker." "You found a bag in my car that wasn't there when I left the hospital," Elena corrected calmly. "And I'm requesting that you preserve all video evidence from the traffic stop, including Officer Ramsey's body camera footage." "I wasn't wearing a body cam," Ramsey said too quickly. "Equipment malfunction." "How convenient." Elena kept her eyes on the sergeant. "I'm also requesting that you contact my commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hendricks at Fort Bragg, and notify her that one of her reserve officers has been detained. Protocol requires notification within 2 hours of arrest for anyone holding active clearance." The sergeant's pen had stopped moving. He stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see him running through the scenarios in his head. The phone calls from Army brass, the questions from superiors, the media attention if this went wrong. Then he looked at Ramsey, and something passed between them that Elena couldn't quite read. "Process her," the sergeant said finally. "But I want everything documented. Everything." The next 2 hours were a blur of fingerprints and photographs and invasive searches conducted by a female officer who apologized under her breath while she worked. They took her scrubs and gave her an orange jumpsuit that smelled like it had been worn by 100 other people. They inventoried her possessions: wallet, keys, phone, the small leather bracelet her father had given her when she deployed for the first time. They put her in a holding cell with concrete walls and a metal bench and a toilet that didn't have a seat. And then they left her alone. Elena sat on the bench and began doing what she did best, analyzing the situation with military precision. Ramsey had planted evidence. That much was clear. But he'd been sloppy about it, which meant either he was stupidly arrogant or he'd done it so many times he'd gotten careless. The dashcam footage would prove what really happened, assuming her car hadn't been accidentally damaged during impound. The security camera across the street from where she'd been stopped was another potential source of evidence, if she could identify the homeowner and get access to the footage before it was automatically deleted. She thought about the way Ramsey had handled the bag, the theatrical pause before his discovery, the self-satisfied expression on his face when he'd announced the arrest. He'd performed the entire scene like a man who'd rehearsed it before, which meant there were probably other victims, other people he'd framed, other lives he'd destroyed. The thought made something cold and hard settle in her chest. She'd spent years in combat zones fighting enemies who wore the fight openly, who came at you with weapons and explosives and clear hostile intent. But this was different. This was an enemy who wore a badge and used the law itself as a weapon, who destroyed people from inside the system that was supposed to protect them. She'd fought worse enemies and won. Around midnight, a public defender showed up, a young woman who looked like she'd been pulled out of bed and wasn't happy about it. She sat down across from Elena in a cramped interview room and opened a file that was mostly empty. "I'm Sarah Chen," she said, stifling a yawn. "I've been assigned to your case. They're charging you with felony drug trafficking, resisting arrest, and obstruction. You're looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted." "I didn't do any of those things." "That's what everyone says." Sarah pulled out a legal pad. "Look, I'll be straight with you. If they found drugs in your car, your best bet is to take a plea deal. First offense, cooperate with prosecutors, maybe testify against your supplier. You could be out in 5 to 7 years instead of 20. Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to a tone she'd used on 19-year-old privates who were about to make catastrophically stupid decisions. "Ms. Chen, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not taking a plea deal because I did not commit a crime. Officer Derek Ramsey planted evidence in my vehicle during an illegal search. I watched him do it, and I have video proof." That got Sarah's attention. Her pen stopped moving. "Video proof?" "Dash cam. I installed it in my car 6 months ago. It runs on a motion sensor and it records whenever the vehicle is running or when someone approaches within 10 feet. It captured the entire traffic stop." Sarah's expression shifted from tired resignation to sharp interest. "Where's the camera now?" "Still in my car unless Ramsey found it and destroyed it. But I also believe there's a residential security camera across the street from where I was stopped. The house at 847 Maple Street. I saw the camera when I was standing outside my vehicle." "Do you know who lives there?" "No. But I know someone needs to get that footage before it's erased or mysteriously disappears." Sarah was writing quickly now, her earlier exhaustion replaced by something that looked almost like excitement. Okay, this changes things. If you've got video evidence of a planted drug case..." "I've got video evidence of a police officer committing multiple felonies," Elena corrected. "Evidence tampering, perjury if he writes a false report, violation of civil rights under color of law. And if he's done this before, and I strongly suspect he has, then there's a pattern of misconduct that goes way beyond my case." "You sound like you've thought about this." "I spent 3 years leading combat surgical teams in war zones. I'm very good at thinking under pressure." Sarah sat back in her chair, reassessing. "You're not what I expected." "No," Elena said quietly. "I don't imagine I am." They moved her to a private cell after the interview, which Elena took as a sign that someone higher up the chain had started asking questions. The new cell had a window, just a narrow slit of reinforced glass that looked out onto a parking lot, but it was enough to track the passage of time as night bled into morning. She did push-ups on the concrete floor until her arms shook, then switched to crunches, then wall sits, anything to burn off the adrenaline and keep her mind sharp. At 6 a.m., breakfast arrived on a plastic tray, runny eggs, toast that tasted like cardboard, coffee that was somehow both weak and bitter. She ate mechanically, fueling her body the way she'd learned to eat MREs in combat. Taste didn't matter, only calories and hydration. At 7:30 a.m., Sarah Chen returned, and this time she wasn't alone. The man who walked in behind her was in his late 50s, with silver hair, a jaw like a snowplow, and the kind of presence that made people stand up straighter without being told. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Elena's car, and when his eyes met hers across the interview room, she saw instant recognition. Not of her specifically, but of what she was. Another soldier, someone who'd been in the shit and come out the other side. "Major Kovac," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus Blackwell. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I'm here because Colonel Hendricks called me at 5 o'clock this morning and told me one of her best combat medics had been framed by a dirty cop. She was extremely persuasive." Elena shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm. You served. Marines. 20 years before I went to law school, and before you ask, yes, I'm taking your case, and no, you don't need to worry about my fees. The colonel and I go way back, and she's calling in a favor. He sat down across from her with the easy confidence of someone who'd walked into worse rooms and walked out victorious. Sarah Chen hovered near the door, looking simultaneously relieved and slightly intimidated. Ms. Chen briefed me on the situation, Blackwell continued. Dashcam footage, potential residential camera, obvious signs of evidence planting. But before we go any further, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened from the moment you left the hospital until you ended up in this cell. Don't leave anything out. Elena told him everything. The traffic stop without cause, Ramsey's aggressive behavior, the invasive pat-down, the theatrical discovery of the drugs. She described the security camera across the street, the way Ramsey had reacted when she noticed it, the too convenient body camera malfunction. Blackwell listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Jack? It's Marcus. I need you to get over to 847 Maple Street in Millerton right now. Yes, right now. There's a residential security camera on that property, and I need you to secure the footage from last night between 11:30 p.m. and midnight before someone makes it disappear. If the homeowner gives you any trouble, tell them I'll personally handle any legal issues and I'll pay triple rate for cooperation. He hung up and looked at Elena. Jack's a private investigator, former FBI. If there's footage, he'll get it. Now, about your dash cam. Do you know if it uploads to cloud storage or is it all local? Cloud backup. Automatic upload whenever the car connects to Wi-Fi. Beautiful. What service? Secure Drive. I can give you my login credentials. Write them down. He slid a legal pad across the table. I'm going to have our tech team pull everything from your account before anyone else thinks to look there. And I'm going to file an emergency motion for your release on your own recognizance. You're a decorated combat veteran with no criminal history, strong community ties, and zero flight risk. There's no legal justification for holding you. Ramsey will fight it, Elena said. Let him. Every move he makes now is another piece of evidence for the civil suit we're going to file once this criminal case falls apart. Sarah Chen cleared her throat from her position near the door. Mr. Blackwell, if the dashcam footage shows what Major Kovac says it shows, if it clearly depicts Officer Ramsey planting evidence, then we need to move fast. Once that evidence becomes public, there's going to be pressure from the department to make it disappear or claim it's been edited. Already thinking 3 steps ahead, Blackwell said approvingly. I like that. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to file motions to preserve all evidence in this case. Every piece of paper, every recording, every note in every officer's notebook. We're going to request an independent investigation by the state police or the FBI. And we're going to make enough noise that if anything does disappear, the cover-up becomes a bigger crime than the original offense. He turned back to Elena. But I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be quick or easy. Ramsey's going to double down. The department's going to circle the wagons. There will be people who assume you're guilty because cops don't lie and nurses don't get framed. You're going to see your name dragged through the mud, your service questioned, your entire life picked apart by people looking for any excuse to believe the worst about you. I've been through worse. I believe you, but combat ends. This kind of fight can drag on for years. Elena met his eyes without flinching. Then it drags on for years. I'm not letting this go. Blackwell's smile was sharp as a knife. Good, because neither am I. The arraignment happened at 2 p.m. in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and broken dreams. Elena stood before the judge in her orange jumpsuit, flanked by Marcus Blackwell on one side and Sarah Chen on the other. The prosecutor, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the pinched expression of someone who'd been told this was supposed to be an easy case, outlined the charges with mechanical precision. Possession with intent to distribute, resisting arrest, obstruction of justice. Blackwell waited until the prosecutor finished, then rose to his feet with the kind of theatrical timing that suggested he'd been planning this moment since he walked into the building. Your Honor, the defense moves for immediate dismissal of all charges on the grounds that the evidence was obtained through an illegal search and seizure, and that there is credible reason to believe the alleged narcotics were planted by the arresting officer. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The prosecutor shot to his feet. Your Honor, that's a serious accusation with absolutely no— We have video evidence, Blackwell interrupted smoothly. Dash cam footage from Major Kovach's vehicle that clearly shows Officer Derek Ramsey removing a plastic bag from his own person and placing it inside the defendant's car before claiming to discover it. We also have reason to believe there is corroborating footage from a residential security camera at the scene. Both pieces of evidence are currently being preserved through emergency court order. The judge, a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen every trick in the book, leaned forward. You're claiming a police officer planted evidence. I'm not claiming anything, Your Honor. I'm stating a fact that will be proven through video documentation. And given the severity of what this evidence will show, we're requesting that Major Kovach be released on her own recognizance pending a full investigation. The prosecutor was scrambling now, flipping through papers that clearly didn't contain the information he needed. Your Honor, the people oppose release. The defendant is charged with serious felonies. The defendant is a decorated combat veteran with 3 service tours, an honorable discharge, an active security clearance, and 0 criminal history, Blackwell countered. She has deep roots in this community, a stable career as a trauma nurse, and absolutely no reason to flee. The only danger she poses is to Officer Ramsey's career, assuming he actually committed the crimes we're alleging. The judge looked down at the file in front of her, then at Elena. Major Kovach, is it true you served 3 combat tours? Yes, Your Honor. 2 in Iraq with the 28th Combat Support Hospital, 1 in Afghanistan with a forward surgical team attached to the 3rd Marine Division. And you're currently employed at Riverside General? Yes, ma'am. I've been working in their trauma unit for 5 years. The judge's expression was unreadable, but Elena caught something shifting in her eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but a kind of sharp interest that suggested she wasn't going to let this case be swept under the rug. Bail is set at $5,000, cash or bond, the judge said finally. Defendant is ordered to surrender her passport, remain within the county limits, and check in weekly with a probation officer. The court is also issuing an order for the preservation of all video evidence related to this case, including but not limited to any dash cam footage, body camera footage, and residential security footage from the area of the traffic stop. Any destruction or tampering with said evidence will be treated as obstruction of justice and contempt of court. She brought her gavel down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Mr. Blackwell, I want your video evidence submitted to the court within 72 hours. If it shows what you claim it shows, we're going to have a very different conversation about these charges. Understood, Your Honor. Thank you. Elena was processed out 3 hours later, stepping into the late afternoon sunlight with Blackwell at her side and the weight of an ankle monitor locked around her leg. Her car had been impounded, her scrubs were evidence, and the look on the desk sergeant's face when she walked past suggested that word of the video evidence had already spread through the department. Blackwell walked her to his car, a black Mercedes that probably cost more than she made in 2 years, and opened the passenger door like she was a general instead of a suspect. There's a hotel 3 blocks from your apartment, he said as he pulled into traffic. I've booked you a room for the next week. Don't go home. Don't talk to anyone from work. Don't answer your phone unless it's me or Ms. Chen. Ramsey's going to be desperate now, and desperate cops do stupid things. You think he'll come after me? I think he's going to try to discredit you any way he can. Anonymous tips to the media about your military service, leaked suggestions that you had PTSD or anger issues, maybe some creative interpretation of your medical records. He's got a whole department backing him, and you've got me, which means we need to be smarter and cleaner than they are. Elena watched the familiar streets of Millerton roll past her window. How many times have you done this? Taken on a corrupt cop? Often enough to know how it ends. They'll fight dirty until the evidence becomes impossible to ignore, then they'll cut Ramsey loose and pretend they never trusted him in the first place. The question is how much damage they'll do to you before they give up. I can take damage. I know you can, but you shouldn't have to. He pulled up in front of the hotel, a mid-range chain that looked clean and anonymous, and handed her a key card. Room 412. Get some rest. Real rest. And Major? He waited until she met his eyes. We're going to win this. Not because the system works, but because you were smart enough to have a camera running when Ramsey decided to play God. Elena took the key card and stepped out of the car, her legs unsteady after 2 days of adrenaline and concrete floors and too little sleep. She made it to her room, locked the door, checked the windows and the locks twice more out of habit, and finally collapsed onto the bed, still wearing the clothes Blackwell's office had provided. Her phone, returned from evidence along with her other possessions, buzzed with notifications. 63 text messages, 27 missed calls, voicemails from colleagues at the hospital, friends from her army unit, reporters who'd somehow gotten her number. She ignored all of it and opened her email instead. The message from Colonel Hendricks was time-stamped 5:47 a.m. Elena, just heard about your situation from Marcus. I've already made calls to Fort Bragg, legal, and the Army CID. If this cop did what I think he did, he's going to regret ever putting on that badge. You were the best combat medic I ever served with. You saved lives under fire that would have broken most people. Don't let some small-town thug make you forget who you are. Stay strong, stay smart, and let Marcus do what he does best. Patricia Elena read it twice, feeling something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was locked tight. Then she set the phone on the nightstand, turned off the lights, and closed her eyes. Sleep came hard and thin, full of fragments, the flash of Ramsey's smile in the darkness, the cold bite of handcuffs, the weight of the bag in his hands before he slipped it beneath her seat. She woke 3 times from dreams where she was back in the holding cell, only to find herself in the hotel room with streetlight bleeding through the curtains and the sound of traffic humming beyond the walls. The 3rd time she woke, her phone was ringing. The screen showed 4:37 a.m. and a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Major Kovac? A man's voice, unfamiliar, tight with urgency. My name is Jack Morrison. I'm the investigator working with Marcus Blackwell. I need you to listen very carefully. I got the footage from the residential camera at 847 Maple Street. Elena sat up, suddenly wide awake. And it shows everything. Ramsey reaching into his vest, Ramsey planting the bag, Ramsey looking around to make sure no one was watching. It's all there, crystal clear, time-stamped and date-stamped. Your dash cam footage corroborates it from a different angle. That's good news. It should be, but there's a problem. Morrison's voice dropped lower. About an hour ago, someone tried to break into the homeowner's house. They didn't take anything, just tripped the alarm and ran. But the first thing the homeowner checked was the security system, which means someone knows that footage exists and they're trying to destroy it. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. The footage is backed up, right? Multiple copies in multiple locations, but Major, whoever tried to get into that house knew exactly what they were looking for. They went straight for the security system. That's not random. That's someone from inside the department trying to cover Ramsey's ass. Or Ramsey himself. Maybe. But I don't think he's smart enough to pull this off alone. I think he's got help, and that means this goes deeper than one dirty cop. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at Millerton's sleeping streets. Somewhere out there, Ramsey was panicking. Somewhere out there, other cops were making phone calls and having quiet conversations about how to make this problem disappear. And somewhere out there, other victims, people Ramsey had framed before, were going about their lives, maybe in prison, maybe destroyed by convictions they didn't deserve, all because no one had caught him before. Mr. Morrison, she said quietly, I need you to do something for me. I need you to pull every arrest Ramsey has made in the last 5 years. Look for patterns. Drug cases where the evidence was found during traffic stops. Suspects who claimed they were framed. Anyone who said Ramsey planted evidence but wasn't believed. You think there are more victims? I know there are. Men like Ramsey don't start with felony frame-ups. They build up to it. And if we can find the others, we can prove this wasn't a mistake. We can prove it was a system. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, I'll start pulling records first thing in the morning. But Major, watch your back. If they tried to get to that security footage, they might try to get to you. Let them try, Elena said, and ended the call. She stood at the window until sunrise painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, thinking about war and justice and the long road ahead. In combat, you knew who the enemy was. They wore different uniforms, spoke different languages, came at you from across clearly drawn lines. But this enemy wore the same flag she'd fought under, hid behind the same institution she'd sworn to defend, and used the law itself as a weapon against the people it was meant to protect. It was going to be a different kind of war, but she'd fought worse battles and won. And by 9 o'clock that morning, the war had already begun. Elena was standing in the hotel bathroom, washing her face with water that never got quite hot enough, when her phone lit up with a call from Marcus Blackwell. She answered on the second ring. "Turn on the news," he said without preamble. "Channel 7, now." She grabbed the remote and flipped through channels until she found it. A perfectly coiffed anchor sitting behind a desk with breaking news slashed across the bottom of the screen in aggressive red letters. The headline made Elena's stomach turn to ice. Decorated nurse or drug trafficker? Questions surround Millerton arrest. Sources within the Millerton Police Department say the woman arrested Thursday night on drug trafficking charges is a former Army nurse with a history of behavioral issues stemming from combat-related trauma. Elena Kovac, 34, was stopped during a routine traffic check when officers allegedly discovered over 2 kilograms of cocaine in her vehicle. While her attorney claims the evidence was planted, law enforcement sources tell a different story. One of a healthcare worker with access to controlled substances and a possible PTSD diagnosis that may have contributed to erratic behavior. The anchor's voice was smooth, professional, designed to sound objective while planting poison in every sentence. Elena watched her own driver's license photo appear on screen, a terrible picture from 3 years ago that made her look exhausted and vaguely hostile, alongside footage of the police station and a stock photo of cocaine bags that bore no resemblance to what Ramsey had planted. "They're destroying you before we even get to court," Blackwell said in her ear. Classic dirty cop playbook. Leak just enough to the media to contaminate the jury pool, make you look unstable, plant the seed that maybe you did it after all. Who's the source? Officially anonymous. Realistically, either Ramsey himself or someone in the department running interference for him. They know the video evidence is coming and they're trying to preemptively discredit you. Elena turned off the television, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened screen. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd slept 3 hours in the past 2 days, whose life had been detonated by a corrupt cop, whose face was now plastered across morning news shows as a suspected drug dealer. "What do we do?" she asked. "We fight back. I've got a press conference scheduled for 11 a.m. at my office. You're going to stand next to me in your best professional attire, and we're going to tell your story, service record, clean history, the whole 9 yards. Then we're going to release still frames from the dashcam footage showing Ramsey planting the evidence. Won't that compromise the criminal case? The criminal case is already compromised. They leaked first, which means they're playing dirty. We respond in kind, but with the truth. By noon today, every news outlet in the state is going to know that a Millerton cop framed a decorated combat veteran." Elena closed her eyes, thinking through the angles. Going public meant exposure, scrutiny, every detail of her life examined under a microscope. But staying silent meant letting Ramsey control the narrative, letting him paint her as an unstable veteran who'd cracked under pressure. "I'll be ready," she said. "Good. I'm sending a car to pick you up at 10:30. Wear something that screams professional and trustworthy. And Elena? Don't read the comments on any news sites. They're going to be ugly." He hung up before she could respond. Elena set the phone down and opened her laptop, immediately breaking the one rule Blackwell had just given her. The news story had already been shared 400 times on social media, and the comments section was exactly as toxic as predicted. Another criminal claiming they were framed. They always say that. If she has PTSD, she shouldn't be working with patients anyway. This is what happens when we don't take mental health seriously. I support our troops, but the military isn't sending us their best anymore. Some of these people come back damaged. She looks guilty in that photo. You can always tell. Elena forced herself to close the browser. She'd seen worse things written about her by enemies who actually wanted her dead. Random strangers on the internet were just noise. But the poison was already spreading, shaping public opinion before the truth had a chance to catch up. She showered, dressed in the clean clothes Blackwell's office had provided, dark slacks, a cream blouse, a blazer that fit well enough, and waited for the car. When it arrived at exactly 10:30, the driver was a severe-looking woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Diane and said nothing else for the entire 20-minute drive to Blackwell's law office. The building was downtown, a renovated historical property with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo like a judgment. Blackwell met her in the lobby, flanked by two associates and Jack Morrison, the investigator who'd secured the security footage. Morrison was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with the compact build and watchful eyes of someone who'd spent time in law enforcement. "Major Kovach." He shook her hand. "Good to finally meet you in person. I've been going through Ramsey's arrest records like you asked. So far, I've found 6 cases in the past 3 years that match the pattern. Traffic stops for minor violations that escalated to drug possession charges. All of them Black or Hispanic defendants from low-income neighborhoods. All of them claimed the drugs were planted. All of them were convicted anyway." Elena felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. 6 people. That we know of. Could be more if we go back further. I'm still pulling records. "We're not releasing that information today," Blackwell interjected. "It's explosive, but we need to build the case carefully. Today is about establishing your credibility and getting the video evidence into public view. The pattern comes later once we've got the media's attention and they're hungry for more." He led her down a hallway to a conference room where a small crowd of reporters was already assembled. Local TV stations, newspaper journalists, a few bloggers with cameras. They looked up when Elena walked in, and she saw the calculation happening behind their eyes. Was she a victim or a criminal, a hero or a fraud? The story would be decided in the next 30 minutes. Blackwell positioned her at a podium beside him, the American flag on one side and a Pennsylvania state flag on the other. The optics were deliberate and obvious. This was a patriot being persecuted, not a criminal being prosecuted. "Thank you all for coming," Blackwell began, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone who'd done this 100 times. "My name is Marcus Blackwell, and I'm representing Major Elena Kovach in what I can only describe as one of the most egregious cases of police misconduct I've encountered in 30 years of practicing law. Major Kovach is a decorated combat veteran who served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan as a forward surgical team leader. She saved lives under fire. She earned commendations for valor. She returned home and continued serving her community as a trauma nurse at Riverside General Hospital." He paused, letting that sink in. On Thursday night, she was stopped by Officer Derek Ramsey of the Millerton Police Department without probable cause. During that stop, Officer Ramsey planted narcotics in her vehicle and then arrested her for drug trafficking. We have video evidence from both Major Kovach's dash cam and a residential security camera that clearly shows the evidence being planted. We're going to show you that evidence now. One of the associates dimmed the lights and started a projector. The conference room went silent as grainy footage filled the screen. Elena's dash cam perspective, showing Ramsey approaching her window, the confrontational exchange, the order to exit the vehicle. Then the critical moment. Ramsey moving toward the passenger side, his body blocking the camera's view for just a moment before his hand emerged from inside his tactical vest, holding a clear plastic bag. Even in the low-resolution footage, it was damning. The way he glanced around before opening the car door, the deliberate placement of the bag beneath the seat, the theatrical pause before his discovery. Then the second video started. The residential security camera footage, shot from a different angle that showed what the dash cam had missed. Ramsey's hand reaching into his vest, the bag emerging, the plant, the lie. When the lights came back up, the reporters were already typing furiously on their phones and laptops. Blackwell let them process for exactly 10 seconds before continuing. "This is not an isolated incident," he said quietly. "We believe Officer Ramsey has done this before. We believe there are other victims, people currently serving prison sentences for crimes they didn't commit, because no one believed them when they said they were framed. Major Kovach had the resources and the knowledge to fight back. Most of his previous victims didn't." A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Has the Millerton Police Department responded to these allegations?" "They've issued a statement saying the matter is under investigation, which is code for circling the wagons and hoping this goes away." "What about the leaks suggesting Major Kovach has PTSD and behavioral issues?" Blackwell's expression hardened. "Those leaks are defamatory lies designed to discredit a woman whose only crime was being in the wrong place when a corrupt cop needed a victim. Major Kovach does not have PTSD. She has never been diagnosed with any behavioral disorder. She has an active security clearance that requires regular psychological evaluations. She's passed every single one. The people spreading these rumors are engaged in witness intimidation and character assassination, and they will be held accountable. He stepped back from the podium and gestured to Elena. Major Kovac would like to say a few words. Elena hadn't prepared a speech. She'd learned in the military that the best statements were the honest ones, delivered without rehearsal or artifice. She stepped forward and looked out at the cameras, thinking about the 6 people Morrison had identified, the ones who'd tried to tell the truth and been ignored. "My name is Elena Kovac," she said, her voice steady. "I spent 8 years in the United States Army as a combat medic and surgical nurse. I've worked in field hospitals while mortars fell around us. I've held dying soldiers and talked them through their last moments. I've made decisions under fire that most people can't imagine having to make. And in all that time, through all those deployments, I never once thought I'd come home and be attacked by someone wearing the same flag on their uniform." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Officer Derek Ramsey framed me because he thought I was an easy target. A woman driving alone at night, too tired to fight back, with no witnesses to contradict his story. He was wrong. But I'm standing here today because I had resources most people don't have: cameras, connections, the ability to hire excellent legal representation. The people he framed before me didn't have those advantages. They're sitting in prison cells right now, serving time for his crimes. And that's what this is really about. Not just clearing my name, but making sure his other victims get justice too." The questions came fast after that, shouted over each other in a chaos of voices. Elena answered the ones she could, deflected the ones that would compromise the case, and let Blackwell handle the legal intricacies. By the time they wrapped up 40 minutes later, the story had already gone viral. Local news picking it up, then regional outlets, then the national network smelling blood in the water. Blackwell walked her back to his office, away from the cameras and the noise. "You did good," he said. "Better than good. You came across as exactly what you are: credible, competent, and completely believable. Now we wait for Ramsey to make his next mistake." "You think he will?" "I know he will. He's panicking, and panicked people make stupid decisions. The department's going to pressure him to stay quiet, but he's going to want to defend himself. And when he does, we'll be ready." Elena was about to respond when Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "We've got a problem. I just got a call from my contact at the state police. They're taking over the investigation into Ramsey, which should be good news. Except the lead investigator they assigned is a guy named Lieutenant Carl Dietrich. And Dietrich is Ramsey's brother-in-law." The room went very quiet. "That's not possible," Blackwell said slowly. "That's such an obvious conflict of interest that it's completely possible if the goal isn't to investigate but to bury," Morrison interrupted. "Dietrich's going to slow walk everything, lose evidence, conduct sloppy interviews, and then issue a report saying there's insufficient evidence to support the allegations. It's the oldest trick in the book. Can we challenge the assignment? We can try. But it'll take time, and in the meantime, Dietrich's going to be contaminating the investigation." Elena looked between them, her mind already working through the problem. "Then we don't wait for the official investigation. We conduct our own. Morrison, how many of those 6 cases you identified have defendants who are still reachable?" 4 of them are in state prison. 1 was deported after serving his sentence. The last one, Marcus Webb, is out on parole living in Millerton. Start with Webb, find out if he'll talk to us. If we can get even one of Ramsey's previous victims to come forward with a similar story, it strengthens the pattern and makes it harder for Dietrich to sweep this under the rug. Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll track him down today, but Major, these guys have no reason to trust anyone. They've been failed by the system once already. Convincing them to go public is going to be difficult." "Then I'll talk to them myself. If they see that someone who actually had the resources to fight back is willing to use those resources to help them, maybe they'll take the chance." Blackwell pulled out his phone and started typing. "I'm going to file a formal complaint about Dietrich's assignment and request his recusal. It probably won't work, but it creates a paper trail showing we objected from the start. And I'm going to reach out to the FBI's Civil Rights Division. If we can prove a pattern of constitutional violations, this becomes a federal case and Dietrich's investigation becomes irrelevant." The pieces were falling into place, a strategy forming from chaos. But Elena could feel the weight of what they were really proposing, A full-scale war against not just one corrupt cop, but an entire system designed to protect him. Going after Ramsey's previous victims meant exposing the department's failure to investigate earlier complaints. It meant proving that supervisors had ignored red flags, that the review board had rubber-stamped questionable arrests, that the entire apparatus had been complicit through willful blindness. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," she said quietly. "It always does," Blackwell replied. "But we're committed now. The press conference made sure of that. There's no walking this back." Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her check the voicemail that came through seconds later. A woman's voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "My name is Diana Ramsey. I'm Derek's wife. Or I was, until about 2 hours ago when I saw the video of him planting drugs in your car. I've suspected for a while that something was wrong. The late nights, the cash he couldn't explain, the way he'd come home angry and paranoid. But I never thought, I need to talk to you. I have things that might help your case. Please call me back." Elena played the message for Blackwell and Morrison. Both men stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. "Could be a setup," Morrison said immediately. "Get you to meet with her, record you saying something that sounds bad out of context, use it to discredit you." "Or she's genuine," Elena countered. "A wife who just watched her husband commit multiple felonies on camera and realized her whole marriage was built on lies. Either way, you don't take this meeting alone," Blackwell said firmly. "If she wants to talk, she comes here, to my office, with Morrison present and everything recorded. We don't give Ramsey any opportunity to twist this." Elena called the number back. Diana Ramsey answered on the first ring. "Thank you for calling back," she said, her voice tight. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need you to understand. I had no idea what Derek was doing. I thought he was a good cop. I thought we had a good life. And then I saw that video, and I realized I don't know who I married." "What do you want?" Elena asked, keeping her tone neutral. "I want to help you destroy him. Because if he did this to you, he's done it to other people. And I've been making excuses for him, covering for him, lying to myself for years. That ends now. Can you come to Marcus Blackwell's office this afternoon? 2 o'clock? There was a long pause. "He's going to know if I go there. He's got people watching everything related to this case. Then those people will see you doing the right thing." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "I'll be there. But Ms. Kovach, be careful. Derek's scared, and scared men do terrible things. He won't go down without trying to take everyone else with him." The line went dead. Elena looked up to find both men watching her with expressions caught between hope and dread. "If she's telling the truth," Morrison said slowly, "if she actually has evidence of his other crimes, bank records, conversations, anything that proves a pattern, this case just became unwinnable for him. And if she's lying, then we're about to walk into a trap that could destroy what little credibility we have left." Blackwell checked his watch. "We've got 4 hours to prepare. Morrison, I want you to run a complete background check on Diana Ramsey. Finances, social media, any connection to Dietrich or anyone else in Ramsey's circle. I want to know if this is genuine or if we're being played." "On it." Morrison was already heading for the door. "And Elena?" Blackwell's expression was grave. "If this meeting happens and she starts saying things that sound too good to be true, if she's offering up evidence that's too perfect, too convenient, we shut it down immediately. Ramsey's desperate enough to use his own wife to set you up." "Understood." The next 4 hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Morrison returned with a file on Diana Ramsey that painted a picture of a woman whose life had been carefully constructed around her husband's career. PTA president, volunteer at the community center, the kind of police wife who showed up to every department function with a smile and a casserole. No red flags, no obvious connections to Dietrich's investigation. Nothing that screamed setup, but nothing that proved she was genuine either. At exactly 2 o'clock, the receptionist buzzed to announce Diana Ramsey's arrival. Elena watched through Blackwell's office window as a woman in her late 30s walked into the lobby. Medium height, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, dressed in jeans and a sweater that looked like she'd grabbed the first things she found. Her eyes were red from crying, her makeup smudged, her hands shaking as she signed the visitor log. Blackwell led her into the conference room where Morrison had already set up recording equipment. Diana sat down across from Elena and stared at her for a long moment, her expression a complicated mix of shame and anger and something that might have been relief. "I brought these," she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Bank statements showing deposits Derek made that don't match his salary. Text messages between him and other officers that suggest they've been covering for each other. And a recording I made 3 months ago when he came home drunk and admitted he'd been helping out the department by making sure certain arrests stuck." Blackwell picked up the flash drive with gloved hands like it was evidence at a crime scene. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I have a daughter." Diana's voice cracked. "She's 7 years old and she thinks her daddy is a hero. And I realized today that if I don't stop him, she's going to grow up thinking it's okay to lie and cheat and destroy people's lives as long as you're wearing a badge. I realized I'd been teaching her that loyalty to a bad man is more important than doing the right thing." She looked directly at Elena. "I saw the video. I saw what he did to you. And I thought about all the times he came home angry, talking about suspects who deserved what they got, people who were trash and needed to be dealt with. I thought he was just blowing off steam. I didn't realize he was confessing." Morrison plugged the flash drive into his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Elena watched his expression change as he pulled up files, bank records, text messages, the audio recording Diana had mentioned. After 5 minutes of silence, he looked up at Blackwell. "This is real," he said quietly. "The deposits line up with dates of arrests. The text messages show coordination between Ramsey and at least 3 other officers, and the audio recording." He hit play. Derek Ramsey's voice filled the room, slurred and belligerent. "Doesn't matter if he did it or not. These people are criminals anyway, just haven't been caught yet. We're doing the community a favor, taking them off the streets before they hurt someone. Webb was dealing. Everyone knew it. We just couldn't prove it. So yeah, I made sure the evidence was there. You gonna judge me for that? You gonna sit there and tell me I'm wrong for protecting our neighborhood?" Diana's voice, quieter. "Derek, that's planting evidence. That's illegal." "It's justice. There's a difference." The recording cut off. The silence in the room was absolute. "Marcus Webb," Elena said. "That's one of the 6 cases Morrison identified. The parolee's still living in Millerton. If we can get Webb to testify that Ramsey planted evidence in his case, and we have Diana's recording admitting to it, that's corroboration," Blackwell said, his voice sharp with sudden energy. "That's a pattern. That's prosecution." Diana was crying openly now, quiet tears streaming down her face. "I'm filing for divorce. I'm taking my daughter and I'm leaving. But before I do, I needed to make sure someone knew the truth, that someone would stop him before he does this to anyone else." Elena reached across the table and took Diana's hand. "Thank you. I know this wasn't easy." "It's the easiest thing I've done in years," Diana whispered. "Everything else was lying to myself." After Diana left, Morrison made copies of everything she'd provided while Blackwell paced the conference room like a caged animal. "We need to move fast. Once Ramsey finds out his wife turned on him, and he will find out, he's going to do something desperate. People like him don't accept defeat. They burn everything down rather than admit they were wrong." "How fast?" Elena asked. "FBI meeting tomorrow morning. I've got a contact in the Civil Rights Division who owes me a favor. We present everything. Your videos, Diana's evidence, the pattern of victims, Dietrich's conflict of interest. We make this too big for the local department to contain. And Webb," Morrison closed his laptop. "I'll find him tonight, see if he's willing to talk. But Major, you should know, guys who've been through the system, who've lost years of their lives to false charges, they don't always want to relive it, even if it means getting justice." "Then we give him a choice," Elena said. "We tell him the truth, that he can help stop the man who destroyed his life, or he can walk away and let Ramsey keep destroying other people's lives. But the choice has to be his." Morrison nodded and headed out, leaving Elena alone with Blackwell in the conference room that smelled like stale coffee and righteous anger. "You did good today," Blackwell said after a long silence. "Getting Diana Ramsey to come forward, that took guts. Most people in your position would have been too paranoid to trust her." I didn't trust her." I trusted my instinct, and my instinct said she was telling the truth. Combat instinct. Human instinct. You learn in war that people show you who they really are when everything falls apart. Diana's whole world collapsed when she saw that video. She could have doubled down, defended her husband, convinced herself it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, she chose the hard truth over the comfortable lie. That's not something you fake. Blackwell's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He read it, his expression darkening. That was my contact at the local news station. Ramsey just gave an interview. It's airing in 10 minutes. They moved to Blackwell's office and turned on the television. Derek Ramsey appeared on screen in full uniform, sitting in what looked like his living room, the picture of wounded righteousness. The interviewer was a sympathetic local reporter who lobbed softball questions about duty and service and the difficulties of police work. Officer Ramsey, you've seen the allegations against you. What's your response? Ramsey's face was a mask of barely controlled emotion. It's heartbreaking. I've dedicated my life to protecting this community, and now I'm being accused of crimes I didn't commit by a woman who's clearly struggling with serious mental health issues. I pulled over Ms. Kovach because her driving was erratic. I found drugs in her vehicle during a legal search. Everything I did was by the book. But instead of taking responsibility for her actions, she's constructed this elaborate conspiracy theory and hired an expensive lawyer to tear down a working cop. What about the video evidence? I've seen it, and anyone who watches it objectively can see there's nothing there. I was doing my job. The fact that it's being twisted into something sinister tells you everything you need to know about the desperation of her defense team. Are you aware that your wife has come forward with evidence contradicting your story? For just a moment, Ramsey's mask slipped. Elena saw pure rage flash across his face before he regained control. My wife is going through a difficult time. We're having marital problems, and unfortunately she's being manipulated by people who want to use her to get to me. I love Diana, but she's not thinking clearly right now. She'll realize that once she has time to calm down and see what these people are really trying to do. The interview continued, but Elena had stopped listening. She was watching Ramsey's eyes, the tightness around his mouth, the way his hands clenched and unclenched on his knees. This wasn't a man defending himself. This was a man declaring war. He just threatened his own wife on television, Blackwell said quietly. That's how desperate he is. Elena's phone rang. Morrison's number. She answered on speaker. I found Webb, Morrison said without preamble. He's willing to meet, but there's a problem. He says he's been getting threatening phone calls for the past 2 hours. Someone telling him to keep his mouth shut about Ramsey or his parole will get violated and he'll go back inside. He's scared, Major. Really scared. Where is he now? Safe house I use for witnesses. But he's talking about running. Says it's not worth the risk. I'm coming there. Text me the address. Major, I don't think text me the address, Morrison. If we lose Webb, we lose the pattern. And if we lose the pattern, Ramsey walks. She hung up before he could argue and turned to Blackwell. I need to talk to him face to face, victim to victim. If I can convince him that we're actually going to win this time, he might take the chance. It could be a trap. Ramsey could have gotten to Webb, convinced him to lure you somewhere isolated. Then come with me. Bring Morrison. Make it impossible for anyone to claim something happened that didn't. Blackwell studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Let's go. But I'm calling the FBI contact first. If something happens to Webb before he can testify, I want federal agents knocking on Ramsey's door within the hour. They took Blackwell's Mercedes, Morrison following in his own car. The address was in the industrial section of Millerton, a neighborhood of warehouses and auto shops that went quiet after dark. The safe house was a nondescript apartment above a shuttered mechanic's garage, accessed by an external staircase that creaked under their weight. Morrison was waiting at the door. He's inside. Nervous as hell. I told him you were coming, but I don't think he believed me. Let me talk to him alone first, Elena said. Lawyer and investigator might spook him. Let him see I'm just another person Ramsey tried to destroy. She walked into the apartment's small living room and found Marcus Webb sitting on a worn couch, a man in his late 20s with haunted eyes and the kind of tension in his shoulders that spoke of too many nights sleeping in cells. He looked up when she entered, his expression wary. You're the nurse, he said. It wasn't a question. Elena Kovac, and you're Marcus Webb. They told you what happened to me. Traffic stop, planted drugs, conviction, 3 years in state prison for a crime you didn't commit. Webb laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. 3 years of my life gone because that cop decided I fit the profile. You know what the worst part was? Nobody believed me. Not my public defender, not the judge, not even my own mother. Everybody just assumed I was lying because that's what criminals do. They lie. Elena sat down in the chair across from him, keeping her posture open and non-threatening. I believe you. Yeah, why's that? Because it happened to you too. Because I saw him do it. And because I've been digging into his history and found 5 other people who told the same story you did. 6 victims that we know of. Probably more we haven't found yet. Webb's jaw tightened. So what do you want from me? Want me to testify? Get up in front of a courtroom and relive the worst experience of my life so some lawyer can call me a liar all over again? I want you to have a choice, Elena said quietly. You can walk away right now. Go back to your life, focus on your parole. Try to move forward. Nobody would blame you for that. Or you can help me stop him from doing this to anyone else. Help me prove there's a pattern. Help me make sure Derek Ramsey never wears a badge again. And if I help you and he wins anyway, if all this evidence you think you have doesn't matter and he gets away with it again, then at least you'll know you fought back. At least you'll know you didn't let him win without a fight. Webb stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. They're threatening me. Called me twice today, said if I talk to you, my PO gets an anonymous tip that I violated parole. Said I'll be back in prison by the end of the week. Who's they? Didn't give names, but I recognized one voice. Another cop from the department. Ramsey's not alone in this. Elena felt her pulse quicken. You're sure? I spent 3 years learning to recognize the voices of people who wanted to hurt me. Yeah, I'm sure. She pulled out her phone and called Blackwell, putting it on speaker. Marcus, Webb just told me he's receiving threats from multiple officers in the Millerton PD. That's witness intimidation. Federal crime. Blackwell's voice came through sharp and focused. Can you identify the officers, Mr. Webb? Webb hesitated, then, maybe, if I heard them again. Then we're moving you to FBI protection tonight. I'm making the call right now. And Mr. Webb, the fact that they're threatening you means they're terrified, which means we're winning. After Blackwell hung up, Elena leaned forward. You don't have to do this. But if you do, I promise you, I will use every resource I have, every connection, every advantage that you didn't have 3 years ago. I will make sure your story gets told, and I will make sure Derek Ramsey pays for what he did to you. Webb was quiet for a long time, his hands clasped between his knees, his breathing slow and controlled. Finally, he looked up. What do you need me to do? Tell the truth. That's all. Just tell the truth about what happened to you. The truth didn't help me last time. Last time you were alone. This time you've got video evidence, corroborating testimony, physical proof, and a decorated combat veteran standing next to you calling Ramsey a liar. This time is different. Webb nodded slowly, something like hope flickering across his features. Okay, I'll do it. But if this goes sideways, if I end up back in prison because of this, then I'll be right there with you, Elena said. Because if Ramsey wins, I'm going to prison too. We're in this together now. Morrison arranged the FBI transfer within 2 hours, federal agents arriving in unmarked cars to move Webb to a secure location. Elena watched him go, hoping she hadn't just convinced a traumatized man to sacrifice himself for a cause that might still fail. Back in Blackwell's office, they worked until midnight preparing documents for the FBI meeting. A comprehensive file that laid out Ramsey's pattern of abuse, Diana's evidence, Webb's testimony, the video footage that started it all. It was damning and thorough and impossible to ignore. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that Ramsey had one more card to play. She was right. At 1:47 a.m., her phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, voicemails, social media alerts, all coming in at once like a digital avalanche. She picked up the phone with shaking hands and saw the headline that had just hit every major news outlet in the state. Breaking: Army investigates combat nurse for alleged wartime misconduct. Sources say Kovac under review for medication. Theft in Afghanistan. The article was sourced to anonymous military officials, packed with vague allegations about controlled substances gone missing from her field hospital, questions about her access to narcotics during deployment, suggestions that her current legal troubles might stem from a long history of drug-related issues. It was all lies, every word of it. But it was published, it was spreading, and it was destroying everything they'd built. Elena stared at her phone as the notifications kept coming, message after message, each one another nail in the coffin of her credibility. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to fabricate a military investigation that didn't exist, to plan a story so explosive it would overshadow everything else, and that someone had just declared total war. Her phone rang at 2:03 a.m., and Elena answered it already knowing who it would be. "They're good," Colonel Patricia Hendricks said without preamble, her voice carrying the clipped precision of someone who'd been awake for hours. Whoever fabricated this story knew exactly how to make it sound credible. They cited fake case numbers, referenced real units you served with, even mentioned specific medications that were in short supply during your second deployment. But Elena, listen to me very carefully. There is no investigation. I've been on the phone with Army CID, JAG, and the Inspector General's office for the past hour. Nobody has opened any inquiry into your service record. This is a complete fabrication. Can you prove that? I'm issuing a statement in 3 hours that explicitly states the Army has no open investigations into your conduct, past or present. But the damage is already done. The story's out there, it's spreading, and even when we debunk it, people are going to remember the accusation more than the retraction. Elena sat on the edge of the hotel bed, her laptop open to the news article that was destroying her credibility in real time. The comments section had exploded. Hundreds of people who'd defended her yesterday now questioning everything, wondering if maybe she was guilty after all, suggesting that where there's smoke, there's fire. Who could pull this off? Elena asked. Who has the resources to plant a fake military investigation story? Someone with connections in the defense contractor world, maybe. Someone who knows how Army bureaucracy works and how to make a false narrative sound official. Or, and this is what worries me more, someone inside the military who's doing Ramsey a favor. You think he's got people that high up? I think corruption doesn't exist in isolation. If Ramsey's been doing this for years, he's got a network. People who owe him favors, people who benefit from his arrests, people who will protect him because admitting he's dirty means admitting they missed it. And if one of those people has military connections, Hendricks let the implication hang. Elena's other phone, the burner Morrison had given her for secure communications, buzzed with a text. Blackwell. Emergency meeting. My office. Now. FBI moved up the timeline. Colonel, I have to go. Thank you for the statement. Elena, be careful. Whoever's behind this fake investigation story just showed they're willing to burn institutional credibility to destroy you. That means they're more desperate than we thought. The line went dead. Elena dressed in the dark, her hands moving through the familiar routine of lacing boots and checking pockets while her mind raced through scenarios. The fabricated investigation was sophisticated, which meant resources. Resources meant organization. Organization meant this wasn't just Ramsey fighting for survival. This was a coordinated defense by people who had everything to lose if the truth came out. She made it to Blackwell's office in 20 minutes, the streets of Millerton empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional patrol car that slowed down when it passed her. The Mercedes was already in the parking garage, along with Morrison's sedan and 2 black SUVs with government plates. The conference room was packed. Blackwell sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 federal agents in suits who had that particular stillness that marked them as people who'd seen worse things than small-town corruption. Morrison was setting up his laptop, files spread across the table, and in the corner, looking smaller than he had earlier, sat Marcus Webb. Major Kovac, the older agent said, standing to shake her hand. I'm Special Agent Raymond Torres, FBI Civil Rights Division. This is Agent Lisa Kwan. We've been reviewing the evidence your attorney provided, and I'll be direct. We're opening a federal investigation into Derek Ramsey and potentially several other officers in the Millerton Police Department. Because of the fake military investigation story? Elena asked. That's part of it. but also because 30 minutes ago someone firebombed Marcus Webb's apartment. The room tilted slightly. Elena looked at Webb, who was staring at his hands. Nobody was hurt, Torres continued. Mr. Webb was already in FBI custody, but his building sustained significant damage and 3 families were displaced. Arson investigators found accelerant and a timing device. This was professional. Ramsey did this, Elena said flatly. We don't know that yet, but the timing is suspicious. Mr. Webb agrees to cooperate with your investigation, and 6 hours later his home is destroyed. That's either the worst coincidence in history or witness intimidation that crossed into domestic terrorism. Agent Kwan pulled up a map on her tablet. We're treating this as an active threat situation. Major Kovac, you're being moved to protective custody, effective immediately. We have a safe location outside the city. No! Elena's voice cut through the room. I'm not hiding. That's exactly what they want. To make me disappear, to disrupt our momentum, to give Ramsey time to destroy more evidence or intimidate more witnesses. With respect, Major, someone just burned down a building. They're escalating. Let them escalate. We escalate harder. Blackwell leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. What are you thinking? Elena turned to Torres. You said you're opening a federal investigation. How fast can you move? Depends on what we're moving toward. Arrest warrants. Not just for Ramsey, for everyone involved in this network. The officers who threatened Webb, whoever planted the fake military story. Lieutenant Dietrich for obstruction. We hit them all at once before they have time to coordinate or destroy evidence. Torres exchanged a glance with Kwan. That's aggressive. We'd need rock-solid probable cause for each warrant. Judges don't like mass arrests of police officers unless the evidence is overwhelming. Then let's make it overwhelming. Elena pointed at Morrison's laptop. You've got Diana Ramsey's recording showing Ramsey admitting to planting evidence. You've got Webb's testimony about his frame-up. You've got my dash cam and the residential security footage. And you've got the phone records showing threats made to Webb from numbers registered to Millerton PD officers. We've got circumstantial evidence and testimony that any decent defense attorney will tear apart, Kwan countered. What we need is something concrete. Financial records showing payoffs. Communications between Ramsey and his accomplices. Physical evidence that directly ties him to multiple crimes. Morrison cleared his throat. I might have something. Diana Ramsey mentioned that Derek kept a storage unit she wasn't supposed to know about. She found the key in his gym bag 3 months ago and made a copy before putting it back. She didn't know what was in the unit, but she knew he went there every few weeks and always came back with cash. Torres sat forward. Do we have a location? Paradise Storage on Route 19, Unit 237. Diana said the lease is under a fake name, but she's got the key and the access code. That's fruit of the poisonous tree, Kwan said immediately. If we search that unit without a warrant based on an illegally obtained key, we don't search it. Elena's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. We get a warrant based on Diana's testimony that Ramsey has been making unexplained cash deposits and visiting a storage unit under suspicious circumstances. That gives you probable cause to believe he's hiding evidence of illegal activity. Diana's knowledge of the key just points you in the right direction. Torres pulled out his phone. I'll call the U.S. attorney. If we can get a warrant, we hit that storage unit at dawn. But Major, you need to understand, if there's nothing there, if this is a dead end, we've just telegraphed our entire investigation to Ramsey and given him time to lawyer up and shut down. There's something there, Elena said with absolute certainty. Men like Ramsey keep trophies, evidence, proof of their power. He won't have been able to resist. The U.S. attorney took 40 minutes to review the case file and issue a verbal approval for the warrant. By 4:30 a.m., Judge Caroline Ostrowski, dragged out of bed and reportedly furious about it, had signed off on a search warrant for storage unit 237 at Paradise Storage. By 5:15 a.m., a convoy of federal vehicles was rolling toward the facility with Elena, Blackwell, and Morrison following in the Mercedes. The storage facility was a sprawling complex of orange metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fence, the kind of place where people stashed their lives when they ran out of room in their houses. The manager, a sleepy man in his 60s who kept asking if this was really necessary, opened the main gate and led them to Building C, Unit 237. Torres had the key Diana had copied. He held it up to the lock, and Elena saw his hand was completely steady, the mark of someone who'd done this 100 times before. The lock clicked open. The door rolled up with a metallic screech that echoed across the facility. And there, illuminated by the harsh LED work lights the FBI team had set up, was Derek Ramsey's secret life laid out in organized rows. Plastic storage bins lined the walls, each one labeled with dates and case numbers. Torres pulled on latex gloves and opened the nearest bin. Inside were bags of narcotics, prepackaged in the same style as the bag Ramsey had planted in Elena's car. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Sweet Jesus, Morrison breathed. The next bin contained cash, stacks of bills in various denominations, rubber banded together with handwritten notes about amounts and dates. The bin after that held cell phones, burner devices still in their packaging alongside SIM cards and activation codes. Then guns. Then more drugs. Then a laptop wrapped in plastic. He's been running his own evidence planting operation, Kwan said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. This isn't just corruption. This is a full-scale criminal enterprise inside a police department. Torres was already on his phone calling for additional agents and evidence technicians. We're going to need a truck, maybe two, and I want every item documented, photographed, and logged before it leaves this unit. Elena walked along the rows of bins, her stomach churning. Each one represented lives destroyed, people sitting in prison cells for crimes they didn't commit, families torn apart by a cop who'd decided he was judge and jury. She stopped at a bin labeled with dates from 3 years ago and looked inside. The first evidence bag had a case number she recognized from Morrison's research, Marcus Webb's arrest. "Webb," she called. He'd been standing near the entrance, looking shell-shocked. "Come here." He approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the bins like they were bombs that might explode. Elena held up the evidence bag. "This is from your case, the drugs they said you were carrying. Ramsey planted them and then kept the real evidence here, probably as insurance or maybe just as a trophy." Webb took the bag with shaking hands, staring at the case number written in permanent marker. "All this time. I told everyone it wasn't mine. I told my lawyer, my mother, the judge. Nobody believed me. And this was sitting here the whole time." "Not just yours," Elena gestured at the other bins. "There are dozens of cases here, dozens of people who told the truth and were called liars." Torres finished his phone call and walked over. "Mr. Webb, I'm going to need you to formally identify any evidence related to your case. If you can confirm that this bag matches what Ramsey claimed to find in your vehicle, that's direct proof of evidence tampering." Webb nodded, still holding the bag like it was something precious and terrible at the same time. "It matches. Same style packaging, same weight. He told the court he found this in my glove compartment, but I'd never seen it before that day, and now I know why. Because he brought it with him." Blackwell was already working his phone, typing furiously. "I'm filing emergency motions to vacate Webb's conviction and to compel immediate review of every case tied to evidence in this storage unit. If we can identify the other victims, we can start the process of getting them released." The next 3 hours were a controlled chaos of federal agents cataloging evidence, taking photographs, and carefully removing each item to transport back to FBI headquarters. Elena watched them work with the same methodical precision she'd used in combat surgical units. Every action documented, every step verified, nothing left to chance. The sun was climbing toward mid-morning when Torres pulled her aside, his expression grim. "We found something else. Last bin in the corner. You need to see this." The bin was smaller than the others, and when Torres opened it, Elena felt her blood turn to ice. Inside were files, personnel files from the Millerton Police Department. Not official copies, but photographs of the originals printed out and organized in folders. She recognized names, officers who'd filed complaints about Ramsey that went nowhere, supervisors who'd questioned his arrest numbers, internal affairs investigators who'd started looking into discrepancies. And at the bottom of the bin, in a folder labeled with today's date, were surveillance photos of Elena. Pictures of her leaving the hospital, pictures of her car, pictures of her apartment building, all taken in the past week. "He's been watching you," Torres said quietly, "and not just you. Everyone who might be a threat to him. This is how he stays ahead. He monitors potential problems and deals with them before they become real problems." Elena flipped through the photos, her hands steady despite the rage building in her chest. How many people has he been surveilling? At least a dozen based on what's in this bin. But Major, look at this. Torres handed her a printed email, date-stamped from 2 days ago. It was from an address she didn't recognize to another anonymous account, but the content was clear. Kovac is too high profile. We need to discredit before she gets traction. Military angle is best. Hits her credibility and plays into PTSD narrative. I have contacts at defense contractors who can plant the story. That's conspiracy, Blackwell said from behind her. That's coordination. That's proof this isn't just Ramsey. The email headers show it originated from an IP address registered to the Millerton Police Department, Torres added. We're working on identifying the specific computer, but this came from inside the station. Elena looked up at the FBI agent. How many people are involved in this? We don't know yet, but based on what we're seeing here, I'd estimate at least 5 to 10 officers directly participating, plus supervisors who looked the other way, plus external accomplices like whoever planted the military investigation story. This is going to be one of the largest police corruption cases in state history. Morrison appeared at the storage unit entrance, his face pale. Marcus, we've got a problem. Channel 7 just reported that Derek Ramsey held a press conference 20 minutes ago. He's claiming the FBI raid on his storage unit is retaliation for him exposing a corrupt veteran, and he's filed an emergency injunction to stop the search on the grounds that it violates his Fourth Amendment rights. He can file all the injunctions he wants, Torres said. We've got a federal warrant signed by a federal judge. His local lawyers can't touch this. They're not trying to stop it legally. They're trying to stop it in the court of public opinion. Ramsey's got 3 other officers standing with him, all claiming they're victims of a conspiracy to silence whistleblowers. And they're naming you specifically, Major. They're saying you've used your military connections to weaponize federal law enforcement against cops who were just doing their jobs. Elena felt something shift inside her, a cold clarity settling over the anger. They weren't just fighting her anymore. They were fighting the entire concept of accountability, trying to frame their own exposure as persecution. It was a classic authoritarian tactic. When caught, claim you're the real victim. Let them claim whatever they want, she said. In 6 hours, this evidence will be processed and logged into federal custody. In 12 hours, arrest warrants will be issued. And in 24 hours, Derek Ramsey is going to be in a federal holding cell explaining to a magistrate why he's been running a criminal enterprise out of a storage locker. Torres's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his expression went from grim to furious. Say that again, slowly. A pause. Are you absolutely certain? Another pause. Understood. Keep me updated. He hung up and looked at the assembled group. That was my supervisor. Lieutenant Carl Dietrich just announced he's completed his investigation into the Ramsey allegations. His official finding is that there's insufficient evidence to support any criminal charges, and he's recommending that Elena Kovac be prosecuted for filing a false police report and defamation. The words hung in the air like a detonation. That's insane, Blackwell said. We're literally standing in a storage unit full of evidence proving Ramsey's crimes. Dietrich doesn't know about the storage unit yet. He rushed his report specifically to get ahead of the federal investigation. He's trying to create a competing narrative. State investigators say Ramsey's innocent. Federal investigators say he's guilty, and the media gets to frame it as a political fight instead of a criminal prosecution. Can he do that? Morrison asked. He just did. And now we're in a race. If we don't move fast enough, Ramsey's lawyers are going to argue that the federal investigation is tainted by bias and that Dietrich's exoneration should carry more weight because it came first. Elena pulled out her phone and called Colonel Hendricks. The colonel answered immediately. I was about to call you, Hendricks said. The Army's official statement is going out in 10 minutes, categorically denying any investigation into your service. But Elena, the damage is already significant. I've had 3 reporters ask me if the denial is a cover-up to protect a veteran. The lie is outrunning the truth. I need another favor, Colonel. A big one. Name it. I need you to go on record, full interview, major news outlet, explaining exactly who I am and what I did in combat. I need you to make it impossible for anyone to believe I'm the kind of person who'd deal drugs or file false reports. I need my service record to become armor they can't penetrate. There was a long pause. That's going to draw attention. A lot of it. Your deployments will become public. The operations you supported, the casualties you treated, are you prepared for that level of exposure? Elena thought about the storage unit full of evidence, about Marcus Webb's haunted eyes, about the 6 other victims still sitting in prison cells, about Diana Ramsey choosing truth over loyalty, about every person who'd ever told the truth about Derek Ramsey and been called a liar. I'm prepared. Do it. Consider it done. And Elena? When this is over, you're buying me the most expensive bourbon you can find. The next 6 hours were a blur of coordinated chaos. FBI evidence teams transported everything from the storage unit to a secure processing facility. Torres executed arrest warrants for Derek Ramsey, 3 other Millerton officers identified in the surveillance files, and 2 civilian accomplices connected to the fake military investigation story. Blackwell filed 17 separate legal motions attacking Dietrich's credibility and demanding his investigation be thrown out as fatally compromised by conflict of interest. And Colonel Patricia Hendricks sat down for a 90-minute interview with a national news network, laying out Elena's service record in devastating detail. The firefights, the mass casualty events, the field amputations performed under mortar fire, the 73 soldiers whose lives she'd saved through decisions made in seconds while the world exploded around her. By 6 p.m., the narrative had completely shifted. Derek Ramsey was no longer a whistleblower being persecuted. He was a criminal caught red-handed with a storage unit full of evidence, trying desperately to discredit the decorated war veteran who'd exposed him. Elena watched the arrest on live television from Blackwell's office. Ramsey walked out of the Millerton Police Department in handcuffs. Surrounded by federal agents, his face a mask of impotent rage. The crowd of reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. Cameras flashed, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Elena felt something loosen in her chest that had been locked tight for days. "He's not getting out of this one," Morrison said, standing beside her. "Between the storage unit evidence, Diana's testimony, Webb's corroboration, and your video footage, the U.S. attorney has enough to put him away for decades." "What about the others?" Elena asked. "The officers who helped him, the supervisors who looked the other way." "Torres says they're building cases. It's going to take time. Some of these guys were smart enough not to leave direct evidence. But the conspiracy charge is solid. Once Ramsey starts looking at 40 years in federal prison, someone's going to flip. They always do." Blackwell's phone rang with a call from the U.S. Attorney's office. He answered on speaker. "Marcus Blackwell." "Mr. Blackwell, this is Vanessa Reyes, Assistant U.S. Attorney. I'm calling with an update on the Ramsey case. We've completed preliminary analysis of the evidence seized from the storage unit, and I want to inform you that we're prepared to offer Major Kovac a formal apology from the Department of Justice for the ordeal she's been through." "An apology is appreciated but insufficient," Blackwell replied coolly. "My client wants her record completely expunged, all charges dismissed with prejudice, and a public statement from your office acknowledging that she was the victim of a coordinated criminal conspiracy. All of that is already in motion. But there's something else. We've identified evidence from the storage unit that corresponds to 43 separate criminal cases dating back 7 years. 43 people were convicted based on evidence we now believe Derek Ramsey planted or fabricated. We're going to need Major Kovac's cooperation in reviewing the evidence and potentially testifying in the exoneration proceedings." Elena felt the weight of that number settle on her shoulders. 43 people. 43 lives destroyed, families shattered, years stolen, all because one corrupt cop decided he was above the law and an entire system let him get away with it. "I'll do whatever you need," she said into the phone. "Those people deserve justice." "Thank you, Major. And for what it's worth, you did something extraordinary here. Most people in your position would have taken a plea deal and moved on. You didn't. You fought back. And because of that, we're going to be able to right a lot of wrongs." After Reyes hung up, Elena walked to the window and looked out at Millerton's downtown. Somewhere in this city, 43 people or their families were about to get phone calls that would change everything. Somewhere, Marcus Webb was processing the reality that his conviction was being vacated. Somewhere, Diana Ramsey was starting a new life free from the shadow of her husband's crimes. And somewhere in a federal holding cell, Derek Ramsey was realizing that the woman he'd tried to frame had just brought down his entire world. Morrison's laptop chimed with an incoming email. He opened it, read quickly, and let out a low whistle. "Major, You need to see this. It's from one of the victims whose evidence was in the storage unit. Guy named Justin Alvarez, convicted 4 years ago on a drug charge that got him deported to Mexico. Someone sent him a news article about the arrests, and he's asking if there's any way to challenge his conviction from outside the country. Elena read the email, her throat tight. Alvarez had been 19 when Ramsey arrested him. He'd spent 2 years in prison before being deported, leaving behind his mother and younger siblings who were U.S. citizens. The email was written in careful English, asking if, maybe, possibly, there was any chance that the system might actually acknowledge what had been done to him. Forward this to the U.S. Attorney, she said. Alvarez deserves the same chance at justice as everyone else. I don't care if he's in Mexico. We find a way to fix this. Blackwell made a note. I'll make sure it happens. But Elena, you should know, this is going to consume months of your life, maybe years. Every one of these exonerations is going to require testimony, depositions, court appearances. You're going to have to relive this case over and over again. I know. And there's going to be pushback. Police unions defending their members. Politicians who don't want to admit the system failed this badly. People who'll say you're just trying to get revenge or seeking attention. Let them say it. I've been called worse by better people. Morrison closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. There's one more thing we need to talk about. The civil suit. Ramsey's obviously judgment-proof. He's going to prison and his assets are being seized. But the city of Millerton, the police department, the supervisors who enabled this, they're all liable. We're talking about institutional failure on a massive scale. The damages could be substantial. How substantial? Hard to say until we depose everyone and build the full case. But based on precedent for civil rights violations this severe, we'd be looking at a settlement in the range of $20 to $30 million. Maybe more if we can prove the department knew about Ramsey's activities and chose to ignore them. The number was almost abstract, too large to really process. Elena thought about her apartment, her student loans from nursing school, the used Honda that was still sitting in the impound lot. She'd never had money. She'd never needed much. But $30 million could fund something bigger than personal comfort. If we win, she said slowly, I want the money to go towards something permanent. Legal defense fund for people who can't afford attorneys like you. Investigative support for exposing corrupt cops. Something that makes sure the next person who gets framed by someone like Ramsey has the resources to fight back. Blackwell smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since this started. We can set up a foundation, the Kovach Fund for Criminal Justice Reform. Use the settlement to provide exactly the kind of support you're describing. Not the Kovach Fund, something that doesn't make this about me. This is bigger than one case. The Sentinel Fund, then, because that's what you've become, someone standing watch, making sure the system doesn't crush people who don't have the power to defend themselves. Elena nodded, feeling something shift into place. This was never just about clearing her name. It was about making sure Derek Ramsey's victims got justice, and making sure future victims had the tools to fight back against the next corrupt cop who thought a badge made him untouchable. Torres called at 11 p.m. with an update. Ramsey's arraignment is tomorrow at 2 p.m. in federal court. He's being charged with 43 counts of evidence tampering, conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and about a dozen other felonies. His bail hearing is going to be interesting. Prosecutors asking for no bail given the severity of the charges and his access to police resources. Will he flip? Elena asked. Will he give up the other officers involved? His lawyer's already making noise about cooperation, but here's the thing. Ramsey's got leverage. He knows who else is dirty, who took payoffs, who looked the other way. If he decides to burn down the whole department to save himself, this case gets a lot bigger and a lot messier. Let it get messy. The truth usually is. That's a very military way of looking at it, Major. It's the only way I know how to look at it, Agent Torres. After he hung up, Elena realized she hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours. Morrison ordered takeout from a Chinese restaurant 3 blocks away, and they ate in Blackwell's conference room, the table covered with legal files and evidence logs, and the accumulated detritus of a case that had exploded into something none of them had fully anticipated. Question, Morrison said through a mouthful of lo mein. What are you going to do after this is over? I mean, after the trials and the settlements and all the exoneration proceedings, are you going back to nursing? Elena hadn't let herself think that far ahead. The question hung in the air while she considered it. Could she go back to Riverside General and slip back into her old life, treating trauma cases and working double shifts, pretending none of this had happened? Could she look at another police officer bringing in a suspect and not wonder if the arrest was legitimate or manufactured? I don't know, she said finally. Maybe. Or maybe I do something with the foundation, if we get it set up. Work on criminal justice reform full-time. I've spent years fixing physical trauma. Maybe it's time to fix systemic trauma. The system could use someone like you, Blackwell said. Someone who understands both the medical and military side, who's seen how institutions can fail people. There aren't many voices like that in the reform space. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously, half expecting another threat. Instead, she found a message that made her breath catch. Major Kovac, my name is Robert Martinez. I was convicted 5 years ago for drug possession in a case where Officer Ramsey was the arresting officer. I've been in Grafton State Prison for the past 3 years. I just saw the news about the storage unit. Is there any chance my case could be one of the ones you're helping to overturn? I told everyone the drugs weren't mine, but nobody believed me. Maybe now someone will. Thank you for fighting back. You gave me hope. She showed the message to Blackwell, who immediately pulled up his case file. Martinez, Robert Martinez, age 24, first offense. Traffic stop that escalated to a felony possession charge. He's doing 7 years because the amount put him over the threshold for trafficking. Was his evidence in the storage unit? Morrison checked his laptop, cross-referencing the evidence logs Torres had sent over. Case number matches. Ramsey kept everything organized by case number, probably so he could keep track of which lie went with which victim. Martinez's bag is in the system. Elena texted back. Mr. Martinez, my attorney is reviewing your case right now. If the evidence matches what we found in the storage unit, we're going to fight to get your conviction vacated. You're not alone anymore. Help is coming. The reply came seconds later. I'm crying right now. Thank you. Thank you so much. How many more are there? Elena asked quietly. How many people sitting in cells right now, watching the news and wondering if maybe, finally, someone's going to believe them? We won't know until we match all the evidence from the storage unit to case files, Blackwell said. But based on the preliminary count, probably 24 currently incarcerated. The rest served their time and got released, but they're living with felony records that destroy their ability to get jobs, housing, education. We'll need to work on getting those records expunged too. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights scattered across Millerton like fallen stars. Each light was someone's home, someone's life, someone's story. How many of them had been touched by Ramsey's corruption? How many families had been destroyed by a cop who decided the law didn't apply to him? We're going to fix all of it, she said. Every case, every conviction, every life he damaged. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. Nobody gets left behind. It was the same promise she'd made to herself in combat when a soldier went down. You don't leave people on the battlefield. You bring them home, or you die trying. Morrison's phone rang. He answered it, listened, and his expression went from neutral to shocked. Say that again. You're absolutely sure? A pause. Okay, yeah. We'll be there. He hung up and looked at them with wide eyes. That was Torres. Derek Ramsey just tried to kill himself in his cell. He's being transported to Millerton General Hospital right now. The words hit like a physical blow. Elena grabbed her jacket. Which hospital? Millerton General. Why? Because that's where I work. That's where he's going to wake up if he survives, and I need to be there. Elena, that's a terrible idea, Blackwell said immediately. You can't be anywhere near him. If something happens, if he dies, if there's a complication, they'll try to blame you. They'll say you wanted revenge, that you influenced his medical care, that you... I don't care what they'll say. I spent 8 years saving lives, including the lives of people who were trying to kill me. I'm not going to let Derek Ramsey die in a hospital bed because I was too afraid of optics to do my job. She was out the door before either of them could argue further, Morrison scrambling to follow her. The drive to Millerton General took 8 minutes, the emergency entrance already swarming with police vehicles and news vans that had caught wind of the story. Elena pushed through the crowd, flashing her hospital ID at the security guard who tried to stop her. I work here, she said. And I'm a trauma nurse. If they need help, Major Kovac, Dr. Sarah Brennan, the ER chief, appeared from behind the security desk. I thought you were on leave. I am, but I heard about the patient being brought in and I came to help if you need it. Brennan's expression was complicated, caught between professional gratitude and political awareness. The patient is Derek Ramsey, the officer who arrested you. You understand why having you anywhere near his care is problematic. I understand, but I also understand that you're short-staffed tonight because Johnson called in sick and Rodriguez is on vacation. If you've got a critical patient coming in and you need experienced hands, I'm offering. Brennan studied her for a long moment. If I let you in that trauma bay, you follow my orders exactly. No independent decisions, no deviation from protocol, no matter what. Clear? Crystal. Then scrub in. But Elena, if this goes sideways, I can't protect you. I'm not asking you to. The trauma bay was controlled chaos when Elena entered, the code team already setting up for a critical patient arrival. She scrubbed her hands with practiced efficiency, pulled on gloves and a gown, and positioned herself at the secondary station where she could assist without being the primary care provider. The ambulance arrived with sirens wailing. Paramedics wheeled in a gurney carrying Derek Ramsey, his wrists bandaged, an oxygen mask over his face, his skin pale as death. Elena felt her stomach twist, not with satisfaction or revenge, but with the same clinical focus that had kept her steady through hundreds of trauma cases. This was a patient, nothing more, nothing less. Multiple lacerations to both wrists, the lead paramedic reported. Significant blood loss, estimated 2 units. BP is 80/50 and dropping. We've got 2 large bore IVs running wide open with saline, and we started a transfusion en route. Brennan moved into position at the head of the gurney. Let's get him on the table. Elena, I need you to establish vascular access and start a second transfusion. Move. Elena's hands moved through the familiar routine, finding the vein, threading the catheter, securing the line, connecting the blood bag. Her mind was empty of everything except the technical requirements of the task. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd done under fire in places where the wounded enemy got the same care as friendly forces because that's what healers did. Ramsey's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. He looked around the trauma bay, saw the people working on him, and then his gaze landed on Elena. For just a moment, clarity returned to his face. Recognition, horror, understanding that the woman he'd tried to destroy was now the woman keeping him alive. No, he whispered through the oxygen mask. Not her, not... Mr. Ramsey, you need to stay calm, Brennan said firmly. We're trying to help you. She's going to kill me. I'm going to keep you alive, Elena said quietly, her hands steady as she adjusted the transfusion rate. That's my job. That's what I do. Even for people who don't deserve it. His eyes locked on hers, and she saw something shift there. Fear giving way to confusion, giving way to something that might have been shame. Then his blood pressure dropped further, and Brennan called for more interventions, and the moment was gone. They worked on him for 40 minutes, stabilizing his blood pressure, suturing his wrists, treating him for shock and blood loss, and the physiological trauma of someone who'd tried to escape justice by escaping life. And through it all, Elena worked with the same professional competence she'd brought to battlefield medicine, because healing wasn't about deserving, it was about duty. When Ramsey was finally stable and being moved to the ICU, Brennan pulled Elena aside. You did good work in there. Professional, controlled, exactly what we needed. But you need to leave now before the media finds out you were involved in his care. Torres is already asking questions. Elena stripped off her gloves and gown, her hands aching from the tension of the past hour. Is he going to make it? Probably. He lost a lot of blood, but we got to him in time. He'll live to stand trial. Good. She walked out through a side entrance to avoid the media circus, finding Morrison waiting with the Mercedes. He took one look at her blood-stained scrubs and shook his head. You couldn't stay away, could you? Not my nature? They drove in silence back to Blackwell's office, where the attorney was on the phone with Torres, his expression grim. When he hung up, he turned to Elena. Ramsey left a suicide note. Torres sent me a copy. You need to read this. He handed her his tablet. The The note was handwritten, shaky letters that spoke of desperation and fear. To whoever finds this, I can't do this anymore. I can't face what's coming. I thought I was doing the right thing, cleaning up the streets, getting criminals off the streets before they hurt people. But somewhere along the way, I became the thing I was supposed to be fighting. Major Kovac was telling the truth about everything. I planted those drugs in her car. I've done it before to other people, a lot of other people. I kept evidence because I told myself it was insurance, but really I kept it because I liked having power over them. I liked knowing I could destroy someone's life with a bag of powder and a lie. There are others involved, officers who knew what I was doing and helped cover it up, supervisors who looked the other way because my arrest numbers made the department look good. I'm not the only one, but I'm the one who got caught. I'm sorry to the people I hurt. I know that's not enough. Nothing I say is enough, but I want them to know I'm sorry. Elena read it twice, feeling something complicated twist in her chest. This wasn't redemption. Sorry didn't give back the years stolen from 43 victims, but it was admission. It was truth. And in court, it would be devastating evidence that couldn't be cross-examined or explained away. He just confessed to everything, Morrison said quietly. This note is going to make every trial, every exoneration proceeding 1,000 times easier. The prosecutors won't even need your testimony for half of these cases. They've got his written admission of guilt. It doesn't feel like winning, Elena said. Justice rarely does, Blackwell replied. Justice is messy and complicated and usually shows up too late to undo the damage. But it's still better than the alternative. Torres called back 30 minutes later with an update. Ramsey's out of surgery and stable. He's being moved to a secured medical facility where he'll be under guard until he's well enough to be transferred back to federal custody. But the note changes everything. The U.S. attorney is fast-tracking the exoneration proceedings and moving up the timeline for charges against the other officers. How many others? Elena asked. 6 so far. 3 officers who were directly involved in evidence planting, 2 supervisors who knowingly suppressed complaints, and Lieutenant Dietrich for obstruction. We're still building cases on the civilian accomplices who planted the fake military investigation story. What about the victims? The 43 people whose evidence was in the storage unit? Emergency hearings are being scheduled. The ones currently incarcerated will be released pending review of their convictions. The ones who already served their time will have their records expunged. And Major, the U.S. attorney, wants to personally apologize to each of them. She's insisting on it. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, the first time she'd cried since this nightmare began. Not for herself, for the people whose lives had been shattered and were finally being made whole. Tell her to start with Marcus Webb, she said, her voice rough. He was first to trust us. He deserves to be first to get justice. Will do, Major. And one more thing. The settlement negotiations are starting tomorrow. The city knows they're going to lose, and they're trying to get ahead of it by offering a deal. Blackwell should expect a call. After Torres hung up, Elena sat in the conference room surrounded by legal files and evidence logs and the accumulated weight of a battle fought and won. Somewhere in Millerton, Derek Ramsey was lying in a hospital bed guarded by federal agents, facing a future of trials and sentencing and decades in prison. Somewhere, 43 people were getting phone calls that would change their lives. Somewhere, families were learning that their loved ones hadn't been lying all along. And here in this office, a combat nurse who'd been targeted for destruction was planning a foundation that would make sure the next victim had the resources to fight back. Blackwell's phone rang at 2 a.m. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his expression transformed from exhaustion to something fierce and bright. That was the mayor's office, he said. They want to settle. Full exoneration, public apology, and they're starting the bidding at $25 million. They know if this goes to trial, it'll be triple that, plus years of discovery that exposes every dirty secret in the department. Tell them $30 million, Elena said, and complete cooperation in the criminal investigations of everyone who enabled Ramsey. No protecting supervisors, no covering for anyone. If they want a settlement, they pay for it in both money and truth. That's a hard line. Good. I learned in combat that you don't negotiate with people who only respect strength. You come in strong and you stay strong until they have no choice but to surrender. Blackwell smiled and started typing. I'll draft the counteroffer. But Elena, this means you won. Completely. Total victory. They're going to pay you millions of dollars, clear your name publicly, and help you put dozens of corrupt cops in prison. That's as close to perfect justice as you're ever going to get. It's not perfect, Elena said quietly. Perfect would be if Ramsey never framed anyone in the first place. Perfect would be if the system caught him years ago. Perfect would be if 43 people didn't lose years of their lives. But it's justice, and right now, that's enough. Morrison raised his coffee cup in a weary toast. To justice, then. Messy, complicated, too late but still better than nothing justice. They touched cups. 3 exhausted people in a conference room at 2 in the morning, celebrating a victory that felt more like surviving a war than winning a battle. Elena's phone buzzed one last time. Another unknown number, another text message. She opened it, expecting another victim reaching out for help. Instead, she found a message that made her blood run cold. You think this is over? You think arresting Ramsey fixes anything? He's just one cop in one city. We're everywhere. And we're watching you. Elena stared at the message for exactly 3 seconds before forwarding it to Agent Torres with a single line. They just made their next mistake. Morrison leaned over to read the screen, his expression darkening. That's a direct threat. They're saying there's a network. They're also saying they're scared, Elena replied, her voice calm. Scared people make noise. Confident people stay silent and plan. This message tells me whoever sent it is panicking. Blackwell was already on his phone with Torres, who answered with the exhausted frustration of someone who'd been working the case for 20 straight hours. Please tell me this isn't another crisis. Depends on your definition. Elena just received a threatening text from an unknown number claiming to be part of a larger network of corrupt officers. Exact quote, "We're everywhere and we're watching you." Torres was silent for a moment, then, "Forward the message to this number. Don't respond. Don't engage. We'll trace it and add it to the evidence pile." But Major Kovac? That message might actually be accurate. We've been analyzing Ramsey's phone records and financial data from the storage unit. He was in contact with officers in at least 4 other jurisdictions. This wasn't just militant corruption, it was regional. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. How regional? 3 counties? Maybe more? We're still connecting the dots, but it looks like Ramsey was part of an information-sharing network. Cops trading tips on how to plant evidence, which judges were friendly, which public defenders wouldn't fight too hard. They called it the Thin Blue Line Coalition in their encrypted messages. Very organized, very sophisticated. Then we dismantle it, Elena said flatly. Every officer, every jurisdiction, every connection. If they want to threaten me, they can do it from federal prison. That's the right attitude, but I need to be clear about what you're walking into. These aren't small-time corrupt cops anymore. We're talking about institutional protection across multiple departments, political connections, union backing. The fight just got exponentially harder. Good, Elena said. I'm tired of easy fights. After Torres hung up, Morrison pulled up his laptop and started cross-referencing the phone records Torres had mentioned with public arrest data from neighboring counties. What he found made him swear under his breath. Major, look at this. 3 officers in Riverside County, that's the jurisdiction north of here, all have arrest patterns that match Ramsey's. High number of drug busts from traffic stops, disproportionate minority arrests, suspects who claimed evidence was planted, same playbook, different location. Blackwell moved to look over his shoulder. Can we prove they were coordinating with Ramsey? Not yet, but the timing is suspicious. Ramsey's arrest numbers would spike, then 2 weeks later these 3 officers' numbers would spike in the same pattern, like they were copying his techniques or comparing notes. Elena walked to the window, her mind working through the tactical implications. In combat, you learn to identify patterns in enemy behavior, where they attacked, when they attacked, how they coordinated. This was the same thing, just wearing badges instead of uniforms. We need to isolate the network before they can destroy evidence or coordinate their stories, she said. Torres moves on all of them simultaneously. No warning, no chance to prepare. Just like a military operation. Multiple targets, single execution time. That requires warrants for multiple jurisdictions, Blackwell said. That requires coordination between federal prosecutors and local DAs. That takes time. Then we start building the case now. Morrison, I need you to identify every officer in the Tri-County area who has an arrest pattern matching Ramsey's. Focus on drug cases from traffic stops. Blackwell, reach out to criminal defense attorneys in those jurisdictions and ask if they've ever had clients claim evidence was planted by specific officers. We find the pattern, we hand it to Torres, and we let federal law enforcement do what it does best. Morrison was already typing. This is going to take days, maybe weeks. We've got time. Ramsey's not going anywhere, and the other officers don't know we're looking at them yet. We use that advantage. The sun was rising over Millerton when Elena finally left Blackwell's office, exhaustion pulling at her bones like gravity. Morrison drove her back to the hotel, neither of them speaking, both processing the reality that the fight they thought was ending had actually just expanded into something much larger. Her phone rang as she was unlocking her hotel room door. Unknown number again. She answered cautiously. Major Kovach? This is District Attorney Jennifer Walsh from Riverside County. I apologize for the early hour, but I just got a very disturbing call from Special Agent Torres. He tells me you've uncovered evidence that suggests some of my jurisdiction's officers may have been involved in the same evidence-planting scheme as Derek Ramsey. Elena put the phone on speaker and sat down on the edge of the bed. That's what the pattern suggests, yes. We're still in the early stages of investigation. I want to be very clear about something. If officers in my county have been framing innocent people, I will prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. I don't protect dirty cops, but I also won't let my entire department be smeared based on speculation. What evidence do you actually have? Right now? Arrest patterns that match Ramsey's methodology, communication records showing coordination, and statistical anomalies that suggest systematic misconduct. We're working on getting stronger evidence. Walsh was quiet for a moment. I've been the DA here for 12 years. I've sent hundreds of people to prison based on arrests made by the officers Torres mentioned. If those arrests were tainted, if I've been prosecuting innocent people because cops were manufacturing evidence, that destroys everything I've built my career on. Then help us find the truth. Open your files. Let us review the cases. If your officers are clean, the evidence will show it. And if they're not, then you get to be the DA who had the courage to admit the system failed and fix it. That's better than being the DA who covered it up. Another long pause. Then, I'll call Torres. We'll coordinate. But Major Kovach, I hope you're wrong about this. I really, really hope you're wrong. She wasn't wrong. Over the next 72 hours, Morrison and a team of investigators Torres brought in analyzed arrest records from 3 counties covering a 5-year period. They identified 17 officers whose patterns matched Ramsey's, high drug arrest numbers, disproportionate minority targeting, and a statistically impossible rate of finding narcotics during routine traffic stops. More damning, they found encrypted communication between these officers and Ramsey, discussing techniques for ensuring successful prosecutions and warning each other about aggressive defense attorneys to avoid. The evidence was building into something massive and undeniable. On Thursday morning, Torres called with an update that made Elena's pulse quicken. We've got enough for warrants. Federal judge signed off on simultaneous raids for 6 officers across 3 counties, plus search warrants for their personal storage units, vehicles, and homes. We're executing at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I want you there. Why? Because when this hits the news, and it will hit hard, the media narrative is going to be about you, the decorated veteran who exposed a multi-county corruption network. Your presence makes this real in a way that federal agents in suits can't match. Plus, you've earned the right to see this through. Elena thought about the message threatening her, about the 43 victims whose lives had been destroyed, about every person sitting in a cell right now who told the truth and been called a liar. I'll be there. Where do you need me? Riverside County Sheriff's Department, 5:30 a.m. Bring Blackwell. This is going to get legal very quickly. The next morning broke cold and gray, autumn rain drumming against the windshield as Blackwell drove them north toward Riverside County. Elena watched the landscape change from Millerton's industrial sprawl to the more rural character of the neighboring jurisdiction, thinking about how corruption didn't respect city limits or county lines. It spread like infection, finding weak spots in the system and exploiting them. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department was a modern facility that looked nothing like Millerton's aging station, all glass and steel, designed to project transparency and professionalism. The irony wasn't lost on Elena as she watched federal vehicles pull into the parking lot, agents in tactical gear preparing to arrest the department's own officers. Torres met them at the staging area, his expression grim. "We're hitting 3 locations simultaneously. Officer James Garrett at his home, Officer Michael Voss at the station, and Officer Lisa Park at a storage facility where we believe she's been keeping planted evidence just like Ramsey did. Each team has body cameras, independent witnesses, and strict orders to document everything. We're not giving them any room to claim this is a witch hunt." "What about the department brass?" Blackwell asked. "Are they cooperating?" "Sheriff Martinez is in shock. He's known these officers for years, worked with them, promoted them. He's either genuinely blindsided or he's the best actor I've ever seen. Either way, he's given us full access to department records and promised zero interference. And if officers try to destroy evidence before you get there, then we charge them with obstruction on top of everything else." Torres checked his watch. "We move in 10 minutes. Major Kovac, you'll be with me on the Voss arrest. Blackwell, you're observing from the command vehicle. If things go sideways, I need you ready to handle the legal fallout immediately." The convoy moved out in tight formation, no sirens, no lights, just the quiet efficiency of federal law enforcement executing a coordinated operation. Elena rode with Torres, watching the sun break through the clouds as they approached Officer Michael Voss's residence, a modest split level in a middle-class neighborhood that looked exactly like the kind of place a mid-career cop would live. "Voss has been with Riverside Sheriff for 8 years, Torres said as they parked 2 houses down. Decorated officer, community policing awards, the whole 9 yards. On paper, he's exactly what you want in law enforcement, but his arrest numbers tell a different story. 47 drug arrests in 5 years, 39 of them from traffic stops, and not a single one resulted in an acquittal. That's statistically impossible unless the evidence is being manufactured. Does he know we're coming? Not unless someone tipped him off. We've kept this tight." The tactical team positioned themselves at the front and rear entrances. Torres gave the signal and they moved. Elena stayed back with the secondary team, watching as agents knocked on the door and announced their presence. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a man in his 30s, still in his pajamas, holding a cup of coffee that he nearly dropped when he saw the federal badges. "Michael Voss, FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest and a warrant to search these premises. You need to step outside with your hands visible." Voss's face went through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, disbelief, fear, and then a kind of resigned understanding that told Elena he'd been expecting this for a while. He set down his coffee and raised his hands. "What's the charge?" "Conspiracy to violate civil rights, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." As the agents cuffed him and began the Miranda warnings, Elena watched a woman appear in the doorway behind him, presumably Voss's wife, her face pale with shock. A child's voice called from upstairs asking what was happening. The domestic nightmare unfolding in front of them was the same one Diana Ramsey had lived through, the same one that would play out at 2 more houses this morning. The search team moved through Voss's home with methodical precision, documenting everything. Within 20 minutes, they found a locked safe in the basement. Voss initially refused to provide the combination, then relented when his attorney, contacted immediately and now on speakerphone, advised him that obstruction would only make things worse. Inside the safe, plastic bags pre-filled with narcotics identical to the ones Ramsey had kept. Burner phones. Cash in amounts that didn't match Voss's salary. And a notebook containing what appeared to be a ledger tracking arrests by date, location, and outcome. Torres photographed everything before carefully removing items with gloved hands. "Mr. Voss, this evidence suggests you've been planting narcotics in suspects' vehicles and making false arrests. Do you have anything to say about that?" Voss stared at the ground, his jaw working. Then, quietly, "I want to make a deal. I'll tell you everything. Who else is involved, how the network operates, all of it. But I want immunity. That's not my call, but I can tell you that cooperation helps. The question is whether you cooperate now or after we find everything on our own. There are 12 more officers across 4 counties. Some active duty, some retired but still connected. We shared information through encrypted apps, coordinated arrests to avoid patterns, and split cash from asset seizures that we made sure went through. Ramsey was just the most aggressive. The rest of us tried to be more careful. Torres's expression didn't change, but Elena saw his grip tighten on his notepad. 12 officers, names. I need that deal first. Then you'll wait in federal custody while we verify your information. But Voss? If you're lying to us, if you're trying to buy time or send us on a wild goose chase, that cooperation credit disappears, and you're looking at maximum sentences on every count. They took Voss away in handcuffs while his wife sobbed in the doorway and his child watched from an upstairs window. Elena felt no satisfaction in the scene, just the grim recognition that corruption destroyed more than just its direct victims. It shattered families, poisoned communities, and turned people who should have been protectors into predators. Torres got confirmation texts from the other teams. Garrett arrested without incident. Substantial evidence found. Park arrested at her storage unit, caught in the process of attempting to destroy evidence. 3 arrests, 3 clear cases, and now Voss's offer to expose an even larger network. This is bigger than we thought, Torres said as they drove back to the command center. If Voss is telling the truth about 12 officers, we're looking at a corruption ring that's been operating for years. The number of wrongful convictions could be in the hundreds. Can you verify his information? We're already cross-referencing the names he gave us against communication records and arrest patterns. If they check out, we'll move for warrants within 48 hours. But Major, you need to prepare yourself. This story is about to explode nationally. Small-town corruption is one thing. A multi-county network of cops framing innocent people is a national scandal. Elena thought about the threatening message she'd received. Good. Let it explode. The bigger the spotlight, the harder it is for anyone else in the network to hide. By noon, the story had broken across every major news outlet. Federal raids target multi-county police corruption network. Dozens of arrests expected. And at the center of every story, Major Elena Kovac, the combat nurse who'd been targeted by a corrupt cop and then exposed an entire system of misconduct. Her phone became unusable within an hour, overwhelmed by calls from reporters, victims' families, advocacy groups, and people claiming to have information about other corrupt officers. Morrison set up a dedicated phone line to handle the volume, while Elena gave a brief statement from Blackwell's office. I'm not a crusader, she said into the cameras, her voice steady. I'm just someone who refused to accept being framed for a crime I didn't commit. What we've discovered in the process is a betrayal of public trust on a massive scale. These officers took an oath to protect and serve. Instead, they destroyed lives for their own benefit. The victims deserve justice. The system deserves accountability. And the officers who stayed honest, the good cops who did their jobs with integrity, they deserve to work in departments that aren't corrupted by the actions of a criminal few. The statement went viral within minutes, shared across social media with commentary ranging from support to skepticism to rage at the system that had allowed this to happen. Colonel Hendricks called that evening. Elena, you're on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The Pentagon is fielding questions about your service record. The Army wants to give you a commendation for exposing corruption. How are you holding up? I'm functional, tired, but functional. You sound like you did after your second deployment. That worries me. This is harder than deployment in some ways. In combat, you know who the enemy is. Here, the enemy wears the same uniform as the good guys, and it's almost impossible to tell them apart until they've already done the damage. That's why what you're doing matters. You're helping people tell them apart. But Elena, promise me something. When this is over, when the trials are done and the settlements are paid and the foundation is set up, promise me you'll take actual time off. Go somewhere quiet. Decompress. You can't keep fighting at this pace indefinitely. I promise, but we're not done yet. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal motions, evidence analysis, and witness interviews. Voss's information checked out. All 12 names he'd provided matched officers with suspicious arrest patterns. Torres executed simultaneous raids across 4 counties, bringing in officers from departments that had never been touched by scandal before. The public reaction was seismic. Protests erupted outside police stations. Community groups demanded investigations into every drug conviction from the past decade. Politicians who'd campaigned on law and order platforms suddenly found themselves answering uncomfortable questions about oversight and accountability. And in the middle of it all, Elena worked with victims' advocates to contact everyone who'd been convicted based on arrests made by the network officers. One by one, they came forward. Men and women who'd spent years in prison, lost jobs, lost families, lost futures, all because a cop decided they were convenient targets. Marcus Webb became a spokesperson, sharing his story on national television with the same quiet dignity he'd shown in the safe house. "I'm not special," he told an interviewer. "I'm just the one who had someone believe me. But there are hundreds more like me, people who told the truth and were punished for it. This isn't about one bad cop. This is about a system that made it easy for bad cops to thrive and impossible for victims to be heard." The interview was devastating in its simplicity, and it shifted the narrative from police corruption to systemic failure. News outlets began investigating their own coverage of the cases, finding dozens of stories where they'd uncritically reported police narratives without questioning whether the arrests were legitimate. Blackwell called Elena on Wednesday with news that made her sit down. The city just increased their settlement offer to $35 million, but there's a catch. They want you to sign a confidentiality agreement that prevents you from discussing the case publicly. Absolutely not. I told them you'd say that. So they came back with a different offer. $30 million, no confidentiality agreement, but they want you to publicly state that while individual officers were corrupt, the institutions themselves acted appropriately once the corruption was discovered. That's a lie. The institutions enabled this for years by ignoring complaints and protecting bad officers. I'm not going to help them whitewash their failures. Then we go to trial, which means years of litigation, endless appeals, and no guarantee we win more than they're offering now. Elena thought about the victims still waiting for exoneration, about the foundation that could help future victims, about the long game versus the immediate satisfaction of forcing accountability through a trial. "Counteroffer," she said. $28 million, no confidentiality agreement, no requirement that I praise the institutions. But in exchange, they implement comprehensive reforms, mandatory body cameras that can't be turned off, independent oversight boards with real power to investigate complaints, an automatic review of any case where evidence was found during a traffic stop. Make those reforms binding for a minimum of 10 years with severe penalties if they backslide. That's asking for structural change, not just money. Money doesn't prevent the next Derek Ramsey. Structural change does. Tell them those are my terms. They can accept them or explain to voters why they refused reforms that would prevent future corruption. Blackwell was smiling when he hung up to call the city's lawyers. 2 hours later, he called back with a single word. Done. They took the deal. 28 million comprehensive reforms and no gag order. You just forced an entire city to change how it does policing. Elena felt something unclench in her chest that had been tight since the night Ramsey pulled her over. Not victory. This wasn't about winning, but justice, real and tangible and permanent. The settlement was announced at a press conference 3 days later. Mayor Richard Vaughn stood at a podium looking like he'd aged 10 years, reading from a prepared statement that acknowledged systemic failures and committed to reforms. Beside him stood Elena, Blackwell, and Marcus Webb. Their presence a silent testament to what those failures had cost. The city of Millerton acknowledges that Major Elena Kovacs was the victim of a criminal conspiracy perpetrated by officers who violated their oaths and betrayed the public trust, Vaughn read, his voice tight. We extend our deepest apologies to her and to the 43 other victims whose lives were damaged by this misconduct. We are committed to ensuring this never happens again through comprehensive reforms that will make our police department more accountable, more transparent, and more just. After the statement, reporters shouted questions about specific officers, about timelines, about whether other cities needed to investigate their own departments. Vaughn deflected most of them, but when a reporter asked Elena directly what she planned to do with the settlement money, she stepped to the microphone. Every dollar of this settlement will go toward establishing the Sentinel Justice Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal defense, investigative support, and advocacy for people who've been wrongfully convicted or targeted by abuse of authority. We'll offer free legal services, fund independent investigations, and work to identify systemic problems before they destroy more lives. The officers who framed me thought they'd found an easy target. Instead, they built the foundation that will protect future victims from people like them. The applause started small, then built. Reporters, advocates, victims' family members who'd attended the conference. Elena stood at the podium, feeling the weight of what she'd just committed to, and knew this was just the beginning. Derek Ramsey's trial began 2 weeks later in federal court, though trial was almost a formality at this point. His suicide note was admitted as evidence. The storage unit contents were cataloged and presented. Diana Ramsey testified about his confessions. Marcus Webb and 6 other victims gave devastating testimony about their wrongful convictions. Ramsey sat at the defense table looking hollowed out, his wrists still bandaged from his suicide attempt, his expensive lawyers going through the motions of a defense they knew was doomed. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all 43 counts of evidence tampering, guilty on conspiracy charges, guilty on civil rights violations, guilty on obstruction of justice. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later, but legal observers were already predicting a sentence in the range of 40 to 50 years. At 36 years old, Derek Ramsey would likely die in federal prison. Elena wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She was at Riverside General Hospital, back at work for the first time since her arrest. The hospital had offered her return with a formal apology, a promotion to senior trauma nurse, and a raise she hadn't asked for. She'd accepted because she missed the work, missed the purpose of saving lives instead of just fighting corruption. But when her shift ended and she checked her phone to find dozens of messages about the verdict, she felt only a quiet, grim satisfaction. Justice wasn't victory. Justice was just the bare minimum of what should have happened all along. Morrison called her that evening with an update on the broader investigation. Torres just got word 6 more officers from the network have agreed to cooperation deals. They're providing names, dates, evidence locations, everything. The dominoes are falling. How many total cases are we looking at? Latest estimate is somewhere between 200 and 300 wrongful convictions. Torres is coordinating with prosecutors across 4 states now. This is going to take years to sort out completely. But it will get sorted out. That's what matters. Major, can I ask you something? When you were standing on that street with Ramsey planning drugs in your car, did you have any idea it would lead to this? To hundreds of exonerations and a national conversation about police accountability? Elena thought about that moment. The cold certainty that she was watching a crime being committed. The calculation about cameras and evidence. The decision to fight back instead of accepting the frame-up. No, she said honestly. I just knew I wasn't going to let him win. Everything else followed from that. The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later was standing room only, packed with victims, journalists, and curious observers who wanted to see the final chapter of Derek Ramsey's fall. Elena sat in the front row with Marcus Webb on one side and Diana Ramsey on the other, watching as Ramsey was led into the courtroom in shackles. The judge, a stern woman named Beatrice Carlson, who'd been on the federal bench for 20 years, listened to impact statements from 5 victims whose lives had been destroyed by Ramsey's crimes. Each one was more devastating than the last. Stories of prison time, deportation, lost custody of children, ruined careers, all because one cop decided they were disposable. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she stood and faced Ramsey directly. You targeted me because you thought I was weak, a tired nurse driving home alone, too exhausted to fight back, with no witnesses to contradict your lies. You were wrong about all of that. But the thing you were most wrong about was thinking your power came from your badge. Real power comes from choosing to do the right thing when it would be easier to do nothing. Real strength is standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. You had a badge, and a gun, and the authority of the state behind you, and you used all of it to destroy innocent people. I had nothing but the truth and the willingness to fight for it, and I won. She sat down. Ramsey didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead, his face a mask. Judge Carlson delivered the sentence without preamble. 45 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole, to be served consecutively with any state sentences that might follow. At 81 years old, Derek Ramsey would leave prison in a casket. The courtroom erupted in scattered applause that the judge didn't bother to suppress. As marshals led Ramsey away, Elena saw him glance back one final time, his eyes finding hers across the courtroom. She met his gaze without flinching, and she saw the moment he finally understood what he'd unleashed when he chose her as his victim. Then he was gone, and that chapter was over. But that evening, as Elena was packing up her things from the hotel room she'd been living in for 2 months, her phone rang with a call from Torres that brought the entire victory crashing down. "Major Kovac, we have a problem, a big one. Remember that encrypted communication network the corrupt officers were using? We finally cracked it completely, and we found messages that suggest the network wasn't just sharing evidence-planting techniques." "What else were they sharing?" Torres's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "They were being paid. Regular deposits into offshore accounts, coordinated through someone with serious financial resources and connections. Someone who was incentivizing arrests and paying bonuses for convictions. This wasn't just corruption, this was organized crime using police officers as hired muscle. Who was paying them? We don't know yet. The accounts are buried under multiple shell companies and the encryption is sophisticated. But Major, the money trail leads to someone with serious resources. Someone who's been running this operation for years, and who's now watching their entire network collapse. And based on the messages we're finding, they're not planning to go down quietly." "What are they planning?" "We're not sure, but there's a message from earlier today that was sent to at least 15 different recipients, all encrypted. We're still working on decrypting it, but the subject line came through clear. Kovac problem requires permanent solution." The hotel room suddenly felt very cold. Elena walked to the window and looked out at Millerton's streetlights, thinking about how far she'd come, and how much further there apparently still was to go. "How long until you decrypt the full message?" "Our tech team says 6 to 12 hours. But Major, you need protective custody immediately. Whoever's behind this has the resources to hire professional help, and if they've decided you're the primary threat to their operation, then they're right," Elena interrupted. "I am the primary threat, and I'm not hiding. You find out who's bankrolling this network, Agent Torres. You find them, and you bring them down. Because I didn't survive 3 combat tours and Derek Ramsey's frame-up just to be intimidated by some coward who pays other people to do their dirty work." She hung up and immediately called Blackwell. He answered on the first ring. "I just got the same call from Torres you did. Elena, I need you to help me set a trap. Whoever's behind this network is going to make a move. They're panicking because we've arrested their officers and exposed their operation. Panicked people make mistakes. We give them a target they can't resist. We wait for them to make their move, and we catch them in the act." "You're talking about using yourself as bait." "I'm talking about finishing this. Ramsey's in prison, the corrupt officers are being rounded up, but the person funding all of it is still out there with resources and motivation to destroy me. We end this now, or we spend years looking over our shoulders waiting for them to strike." Blackwell was quiet for a long moment. Then, "This is insane, you know that, right?" "I've done insane before, this is just thorough." "All right, but we do this my way, with federal protection, with every precaution possible. I'm not letting a client die on my watch." "Deal. Now help me figure out how to make myself irresistible bait." The plan came together over the next 6 hours, coordinated between Blackwell, Torres, and a tactical team from the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group. Elena would make a very public appearance at Riverside General Hospital tomorrow evening, giving a talk to nursing students about her experiences. The event would be widely publicized, the security would appear minimal, and Elena would be positioned as an easy target. In reality, the hospital would be saturated with federal agents, every entrance monitored, every vehicle scanned, every person entering the building identified and tracked. If whoever was behind the network made a move, they'd walk directly into a trap. "This assumes they're stupid enough to take the bait," Torres said during the final planning session. "Professional hitters don't usually fall for obvious setups." "They will if they're desperate enough," Elena countered. "And they are desperate. We've dismantled their network, exposed their operation, and I'm the person most publicly associated with bringing them down. Eliminating me sends a message that they're still dangerous, still capable of striking back. Their ego won't let them walk away." Morrison looked up from his laptop, his face pale. "Major Torres, you need to see this. I've been cross-referencing the financial data from the offshore accounts with local business records. The shell companies used to funnel payments to the corrupt officers, all traced back to a single source, a real estate development firm called Riverside Holdings Group. Who owns it? Torres asked. On paper? A trust managed by a law firm in Delaware. But I dug deeper into the property records and found something interesting. Every building Riverside Holdings owns is adjacent to neighborhoods where Ramsey and his network made the most arrests. It's like they were deliberately targeting specific areas. Elena felt pieces clicking together in her mind. They were clearing the neighborhoods, getting rid of residents through false arrests so they could redevelop the properties without resistance. That's why they targeted low-income minorities, people without resources to fight back, people whose absence wouldn't be questioned. That's gentrification through criminal conspiracy, Blackwell said, his voice sharp with anger. They weaponized the police department to forcibly remove entire communities. Morrison pulled up property records on his screen. Look at this. In the past 5 years, Riverside Holdings has acquired 73 properties in neighborhoods where Ramsey operated. Every single acquisition happened within 6 months of a spike in drug arrests in that area. The correlation is perfect. Torres was already on the phone with his supervisor, speaking in rapid-fire technical language about warrants and financial crimes. When he hung up, his expression was grim. We're getting warrants for Riverside Holdings' financial records, but this just became a case involving potential RICO charges, racketeering, conspiracy, use of police authority to facilitate real estate fraud. We're talking about federal charges that carry 20-year minimum sentences. Who runs Riverside Holdings? Elena asked. Morrison pulled up corporate filings. The CEO is listed as a man named Lawrence Castellano, age 62, Georgetown law graduate, former federal prosecutor turned real estate developer. Net worth estimated at $400 million. Political connections to state legislators, city council members, and, he paused, his face going even paler, to Lieutenant Carl Dietrich, who's listed as a paid security consultant for Riverside Holdings. The room went silent. Dietrich wasn't just covering for Ramsey because of family connections, Torres said slowly. He was protecting the entire operation because he was being paid to do it. His investigation wasn't just compromised, it was part of the conspiracy. Can we prove Castellano knew about the false arrests? Blackwell asked. We can prove he benefited from them, Morrison replied. Every neighborhood that got hit with mass arrests became easier to acquire at below-market prices. But proving he directed the arrests versus just opportunistically profiting from them, that's harder. Elena stood and walked to the window, watching traffic move through downtown Millerton. Somewhere in this city, Lawrence Castellano was sitting in an office or a mansion, confident that his money and connections would protect him even as his network collapsed. He'd built an empire on the backs of innocent people whose lives he'd destroyed through paid proxies. We need him to incriminate himself, she said. We need him to make a move that's so clearly connected to the criminal conspiracy that he can't claim ignorance. That's why the trap matters. If he comes after me directly or hires someone to do it, that's not opportunistic real estate development. That's active participation in criminal activity. You're assuming he'll take the bait, Torres said. He will, because I'm about to make it impossible for him to resist. The next morning, Elena gave an interview to a national news network that was carefully designed to provoke a response. She sat across from the interviewer in Blackwell's conference room, the camera tight on her face, and spoke with surgical precision. The corruption we've exposed isn't just about individual officers making bad choices. It's about systematic exploitation of vulnerable communities for profit. Someone orchestrated this network. Someone funded it. Someone benefited when neighborhoods were destabilized through mass arrests and property values dropped. And that someone is still out there, probably thinking their money and influence will protect them. They're wrong. The interviewer leaned forward. Major Kovac, are you suggesting there's a larger conspiracy behind the police corruption? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact. The evidence shows coordination, funding, and strategic targeting of specific neighborhoods. This wasn't random. This was planned. And the person responsible is going to be held accountable, no matter how wealthy or connected they are. Do you have specific suspects? The investigation is ongoing. But I can say this, whoever's behind it has made a critical mistake. They built their operation on the assumption that poor people, minorities, and working-class families wouldn't fight back. They were wrong about that. And they're wrong if they think threatening me or anyone else involved in this investigation will make us stop. We're just getting started. The interview aired that evening and immediately went viral. By midnight, it had been viewed 3 million times, shared across every platform, and picked up by international outlets. Elena's face was everywhere, her words being analyzed and debated, her challenge to the unnamed mastermind impossible to ignore. And in a luxury penthouse office overlooking Millerton, Lawrence Castellano watched the interview on a wall-mounted television and realized that the decorated combat nurse he'd dismissed as a minor inconvenience was actually an existential threat to everything he'd built. He picked up his phone and made a call to a number that would later be traced to a contract killer with operations across 3 states. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, and the trap was set. The phone call was traced to a burner cell that pinged off a tower in downtown Millerton at 11:47 p.m., then went dark permanently. Torres had the recording within minutes, Castellano's voice, clipped and professional, speaking to someone who responded only in grunts of acknowledgement. The nurse, tomorrow night at the hospital event. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. 25,000 on completion, another 25 when you're clear of the state. Elena listened to the recording in Torres's mobile command center, feeling nothing but cold clarity. This was it. The final move. The last desperate gambit of a man who'd built an empire on other people's suffering and couldn't accept that it was over. "We've got him," Torres said, his voice tight with controlled satisfaction. "Conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of homicide, all on tape. Even without the RICO charges, that's life in prison." "Can you identify who he called?" "Tech team's working on it." The voice pattern matches a contractor named Vincent Cross, former military, dishonorable discharge, known associate of organized crime families in 3 states. He's a professional, which means tomorrow night is going to be extremely dangerous. Blackwell was pacing the command center like a caged animal. "We should cancel the event. Move Elena into protective custody. There's no reason to risk her life just to catch Cross in the act when we already have Castellano on tape ordering the hit." "The tape gives us conspiracy," Elena said. "But if we don't catch Cross attempting the hit, Castellano's lawyers will claim it was just talk, that he never intended to follow through, that we're misinterpreting a conversation taken out of context. We need Cross to actually make the attempt so there's no wiggle room." "That's insane. You're volunteering to be shot at." "I've been shot at before. The difference this time is I'll have an entire FBI tactical team between me and the shooter." Torres pulled up a blueprint of Riverside General Hospital on his tablet. "Here's how we set it up. The event is in the 3rd floor conference hall, which has multiple entry points and limited sight lines from outside. We place Major Kovac on a raised platform for her presentation, but we use ballistic glass positioned to look like room dividers. From the audience's perspective, it's just staging. From a shooter's perspective, she's exposed. But in reality, she's protected." He zoomed in on the building's exterior. "We position counter-sniper teams on every building with line of sight to the conference hall. We have plainclothes agents inside the event posing as hospital staff and students. And we have tactical response teams staged in 3 locations with sub-2-minute response times to any point in the hospital." "What about civilian casualties?" Elena asked. "If shooting starts in a hospital, we evacuate all non-essential personnel from the 3rd floor under the guise of a plumbing emergency. The students attending your talk will all be undercover federal agents. The only real civilians will be on other floors with lockdown protocols ready to activate on my signal." Morrison pulled up his laptop, showing a new discovery. "I've been tracking Vincent Cross's movements for the past 6 hours. He arrived in Millerton 4 hours ago on a commercial flight under an alias, checked into a motel 3 miles from the hospital, paid cash. He's here, and he's preparing." "Can we arrest him now?" Blackwell asked. "On what charge?" Torres replied. "Being in town isn't a crime. We need him to make an overt act toward committing the murder. Otherwise, Castellano just says Cross was visiting on unrelated business, and we can't prove the connection." Elena looked at this building's schematics, her mind running through tactical scenarios the way she'd assessed combat situations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Identify the kill zones, establish defensive positions, maintain multiple exit routes, never assume the enemy will do what you expect. "Cross is a professional," she said, "which means he'll scout the location before the event. He'll look for security, check sight lines, plan his approach, and escape route. We need to let him see what he expects. Minimal visible security, standard hospital operations, an easy target. Then when he commits, we close the trap. And if something goes wrong, Blackwell's voice was strained. If Cross gets off a shot before the tactical team responds, if he's better than we think he is, then I deal with it the way I dealt with everything else in my life, by refusing to let someone else's violence define my story. The next day crawled past with excruciating slowness. Elena spent the morning reviewing her presentation notes, a talk about maintaining composure under pressure, drawing from her combat experiences and recent legal battle. The irony of giving a talk about stress management while waiting to be the target of an assassination attempt wasn't lost on her. Morrison confirmed Cross had been spotted doing surveillance of the hospital at 9 a.m., walking the perimeter with the casual interest of someone who might be visiting a patient. He'd spent particular time near the service entrances and studied the windows of the third-floor conference hall. He's planning his approach, Torres said during the afternoon briefing. Probably going to try for a long-range shot from an adjacent building or a close-quarters hit disguised as a hospital worker. We're ready for both scenarios. Diana Ramsey called at 2 p.m., her voice shaky. I just saw the news about Lawrence Castellano, about how he was funding Derek's operation. I need you to know, I had no idea. Derek never mentioned him, never talked about who was paying for what. I thought it was just Derek being corrupt, not part of something bigger. Nobody's blaming you, Diana. You came forward with the truth when it mattered. That's all anyone can ask. I'm divorcing him officially next week, taking my daughter and moving to my sister's place in Ohio, starting over somewhere nobody knows our name. That's smart. And Diana, thank you for choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. After she hung up, Elena sat alone in her hotel room, thinking about all the lives that had been shattered by Castellano's greed and Ramsey's willing participation. 43 confirmed victims, hundreds more whose cases were still being reviewed, families destroyed, futures stolen, communities deliberately destabilized for profit. This ended tonight, one way or another. The event was scheduled for 7 p.m. Elena arrived at the hospital at 5:30, entering through the main entrance where Torres and his team had set up the command center in a converted storage room. The third floor had been transformed exactly as planned. The conference hall set up with rows of chairs facing a raised platform, ballistic glass panels positioned to look like decorative room dividers. Every seat occupied by federal agents in business casual attire pretending to be nursing students. Cross just entered the parking garage, Torres said, listening to updates through his earpiece. He's driving a rental sedan parked in the northwest corner. He's been in the vehicle for 3 minutes, probably changing clothes or preparing equipment. Do we have eyes on him? Infrared shows movement inside the vehicle. He's definitely preparing something. Stand by. He's exiting the vehicle now. Elena watched the feeds from security cameras as Vincent Cross emerged from his car, wearing hospital scrubs and carrying a backpack that likely contained his weapon. He walked with the confident stride of someone who'd done this before, entering the hospital through a service entrance that required a key card he'd somehow obtained. He's inside, Torres said. Heading for the service stairs. Teams 2 and 3, be ready to move on my signal. Elena took her position on the platform, a wireless microphone clipped to her collar, her presentation notes arranged on a lectern that had been reinforced with ballistic plating. The agents posing as students looked attentive and engaged, their hands positioned near concealed weapons. Cross appeared on the third-floor camera feed, moving through a corridor that had been deliberately left accessible. He entered a storage closet that provided a sightline to the conference hall through a narrow window, exactly where Torres's team had predicted he might position himself. He's setting up, Torres whispered through Elena's hidden earpiece. Looks like he's assembling a rifle. Long-range shot through the window. We're tracking him. Elena began her presentation, speaking about the importance of staying calm under pressure, about making decisions in crisis situations, about maintaining your moral compass when systems fail. Her voice was steady, her words chosen carefully to have meaning beyond the immediate audience of federal agents. In the storage closet 60 feet away, Vincent Cross settled into a shooting position, his rifle aimed through the narrow window at the woman on the platform who seemed completely unaware of the crosshairs settling over her heart. He took a breath, steadied his aim, began the slow squeeze on the trigger that every professional shooter learns to make smooth and inevitable, and Torres gave the signal. Flashbang grenades detonated in the storage closet, the concussive force and blinding light disorienting Cross for the critical 2 seconds it took for tactical agents to breach the door. He tried to swing the rifle toward them, but 3 agents hit him simultaneously, driving him to the ground with overwhelming force. The rifle clattered away, handcuffs clicked into place. "Target secured," Torres said into his radio. "I repeat, target secured. No shots fired." In the conference hall, Elena didn't break stride in her presentation, even as agents throughout the building moved to secure the scene. She finished her thought about maintaining composure, then looked directly at the camera she knew was recording everything. Sometimes the pressure comes from external threats. Sometimes it comes from people who think they can intimidate you into silence. The key is remembering that fear is just information, data about a threat that requires a response. And the best response is always to keep moving forward, keep fighting for what's right, and refuse to let someone else's violence define your story. She smiled slightly, knowing that somewhere in this city, Lawrence Castellano was watching this feed and realizing that his $50,000 investment in murder had just bought him a life sentence in federal prison. Torres appeared at the conference hall entrance and gave her a thumbs up. It was over. Really, truly over. The arrest of Vincent Cross happened at 7:23 p.m. and made national news within 15 minutes. The arrest of Lawrence Castellano happened at 8:15 p.m. FBI agents entering his penthouse office with weapons drawn and finding him surrounded by lawyers who immediately began negotiating surrender terms. Elena watched the arrest on live television from Torres's command center, seeing Castellano led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of impotent rage. He'd built an empire on the belief that money could buy anything, including the corruption of law enforcement, the destruction of communities, and the murder of anyone who threatened his operation. He was about to learn the price of that belief. The interrogation of Vincent Cross took less than 2 hours. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a murder-for-hire charge that carried mandatory life in prison, he provided a detailed account of his conversation with Castellano, the payment arrangements, and the specific instructions he'd been given about making Elena's death look random. "Castellano told me she was a problem that needed to go away," Cross said in the recorded interrogation that Torres played for Elena and Blackwell later that night. He said she was destroying his business with these investigations into police corruption. Said if I handled it clean, there'd be more work in the future. I've done 6 jobs for him over the past 3 years. This was supposed to be number 7. Torres paused the recording. "Those 6 previous jobs? We're investigating them as potential homicides." Cross is claiming they were all business problems for Castellano, a city inspector who was asking too many questions about building code violations, a journalist investigating real estate fraud, a community organizer trying to stop a development project. If Cross is telling the truth, Castellano's been using murder as a business tool for years. "Can you prove it?" Blackwell asked. Cross is providing details, dates, locations, payment records. We're cross-referencing with unsolved cases. It's going to take time, but yeah, I think we can prove it. And once we do, Castellano's looking at multiple murder charges on top of everything else. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known Castellano was corrupt, that he'd orchestrated a network of dirty cops to serve his real estate interest. But calculated murder as a business strategy was a different level of evil entirely. "How many lives did he destroy?" she asked quietly. "We may never know the full count, but between the people he had killed, the people his corrupt cops framed, and the communities he deliberately destabilized, we're talking about thousands of victims over a decade of operations. Then we make sure every single victim gets justice, however long it takes." The prosecution of Lawrence Castellano moved with unusual speed, driven by the overwhelming evidence and the public outcry that followed his arrest. The U.S. Attorney assembled a team of 15 prosecutors to handle the various charges: racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, corruption of public officials, civil rights violations, and 6 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began 4 months later in federal court, a sprawling proceeding that lasted 7 weeks and featured testimony from over 100 witnesses. Elena testified for 3 days, walking the jury through how she'd uncovered the corruption network, how the investigation had led to Castellano, and how his attempt to have her killed had sealed his fate. Marcus Webb testified about his wrongful conviction and the years stolen from his life. Diana Ramsey testified about her ex-husband's confessions and the recordings she'd provided. Vincent Cross testified about the 6 people he'd killed on Castellano's orders, providing details that turned stomachs and destroyed any sympathy the defendant might have otherwise received. But the most devastating testimony came from the families of Castellano's murder victims. Ordinary people who'd stood in the way of his business interests and paid for it with their lives. A widower whose journalist wife had been killed in a hit-and-run that was actually a professional assassination. A son whose father had died in a random mugging after refusing to sell his property to Riverside Holdings. A daughter whose mother had fallen from a building while investigating safety violations that Castellano didn't want exposed. By the time the prosecution rested its case, the courtroom was silent with the weight of accumulated horror. Castellano's defense team tried everything: claims of prosecutorial overreach, arguments about circumstantial evidence, suggestions that Cross was lying to reduce his own sentence. But the evidence was overwhelming: financial records, communication intercepts. Cross's detailed testimony: the pattern of deaths and arrests that perfectly aligned with Castellano's business interests. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the foreman looked directly at Castellano as he read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. All. The sentencing hearing happened 3 weeks later. Judge Carlson, the same judge who'd sentenced Derek Ramsey, looked down at Lawrence Castellano with an expression of profound disgust. "You weaponized the justice system," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "You corrupted law enforcement, murdered innocent people, and destroyed communities for profit. You treated human beings as obstacles to be removed rather than lives to be respected. The law provides for certain maximum sentences, and I intend to impose every single day of those maximums on you." She sentenced him to 6 consecutive life terms for the murders, plus 240 years for the racketeering and corruption charges. At 62 years old, Lawrence Castellano would die in prison, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous with corruption. As marshals led him away, he looked back at Elena one final time. She met his gaze without emotion, and she saw him understand what Derek Ramsey had learned too late: that the woman he'd dismissed as a convenient target was actually the force that would destroy everything he'd built. Then he was gone, and the courtroom erupted in applause that Judge Carlson allowed to continue for a full minute before gaveling for order. Outside the courthouse, Elena stood at a podium surrounded by cameras and reporters, ready to make her final statement on a case that had consumed 18 months of her life. "Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "It's about restoring what was taken from the innocent. Over the past year and a half, 273 wrongful convictions have been overturned. 273 people have had their lives returned to them. Families have been reunited. Records have been expunged. Communities are being rebuilt." She paused, letting that sink in. "The Sentinel Justice Fund, established with the settlement from my case, has provided legal representation to over 400 people who couldn't otherwise afford it. We've helped expose corruption in 6 different jurisdictions, supported 17 families through wrongful death investigations, and partnered with reform advocates to pass legislation in 3 states making it harder for this kind of systemic abuse to happen again." A reporter called out a question. "Major Kovac, what's next for you?" Elena smiled. "I'm going back to nursing, but I'm also serving as the executive director of the Sentinel Justice Fund, working to make sure the next person who gets targeted by corrupt authority has the resources and support to fight back. Because that's what this was always about. Not revenge, not even justice for myself, but building something that outlasts the people who tried to destroy me." Do you have any message for other victims of police corruption? Yes, don't give up. Don't accept their version of your story. Don't let them make you doubt what you know to be true. Find people who believe you. Build your evidence. Fight back with everything you have. The system doesn't always work, but it works more often when people refuse to be silent. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And there are people ready to stand with you if you're brave enough to speak. The press conference ended, but the questions continued, reporters shouting over each other, cameras flashing, the whole circus of media attention that Elena had learned to navigate over the past 18 months. Blackwell pulled her away from the crowd, Morrison clearing a path to the car. "You did good," Blackwell said once they were safely inside. "That statement is going to be quoted for years." "I meant every word." "I know. That's why it mattered." They drove back to Millerton in comfortable silence, the landscape passing by outside the windows. Elena thought about the journey from that night when Ramsey pulled her over to this moment of complete vindication. It hadn't been quick or easy or clean. Justice never was. But it had been real, and it had been earned, and it had created something permanent. The Sentinel Justice Fund had grown beyond anything she'd initially envisioned. The $28 million settlement had been invested carefully, generating enough income to fund operations indefinitely. They'd hired 15 full-time staff members, investigators, attorneys, victim advocates, all dedicated to fighting wrongful convictions and police misconduct. Marcus Webb had become the fund's director of victim outreach, using his own experience to connect with people who'd been through the system. Diana Ramsey worked part-time as a consultant, helping identify warning signs of domestic abuse in law enforcement families. Even Colonel Hendricks had joined the board of directors, providing strategic oversight and military connections. It was an organization built from trauma and transformation, powered by people who'd been broken by injustice and chose to become the force that prevented others from being similarly destroyed. Elena returned to work at Riverside General Hospital 3 days after Castellano's sentencing, walking into the emergency department at 6 a.m. for the start of her shift. The staff greeted her with applause and a banner that read, "Welcome back, Major Kovac," which she found both touching and slightly embarrassing. Dr. Brennan pulled her aside during a quiet moment between trauma cases. "It's good to have you back. The department hasn't been the same without you. I missed the work, missed feeling useful in a direct, immediate way. You've been useful in ways most people never achieve, but I understand. There's something about emergency medicine, about saving lives in real time, that grounds you in a way nothing else can." Elena nodded, feeling the truth of that. For all the satisfaction of bringing down Castellano and freeing wrongful conviction victims, there was something fundamental about the simple act of stopping bleeding, stabilizing airways, bringing people back from the edge of death. It was healing in its purest form, uncomplicated by politics or corruption or systemic failures. She settled back into the rhythm of hospital work over the following weeks, her hands remembering the muscle memory of IV placement and intubation, her mind falling into the focused calm that came with managing trauma cases. But 3 evenings a week, she left the hospital and drove to the Sentinel Justice Fund's office in downtown Millerton, where she reviewed cases and made decisions about which victims to help next. The fund had a waiting list of over 300 people requesting assistance, each one representing a life damaged by abuse of authority. They couldn't help everyone. Resources were finite even with careful investment management, but they helped as many as possible, prioritizing cases where the evidence was strongest and the need was greatest. 6 months after Castellano's sentencing, Elena received a letter that made her set down her coffee and read it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. Dear Major Kovac, my name is Justin Alvarez. You may remember me. I was deported to Mexico after serving time for a drug conviction that Officer Ramsey manufactured. You and your attorney helped get my conviction overturned, but I've been stuck in Mexico for 2 years trying to navigate the immigration system to come home. I wanted to let you know that my case was finally approved. I'm coming home next month. I get to see my mother and my siblings for the first time since I was deported. I get to rebuild my life in the country where I was born. I know you helped a lot of people, but you helped me when I was in a different country with no way to fight for myself. You didn't have to do that. You could have focused on the victims who were easier to reach, but you didn't leave me behind. Thank you for remembering that I mattered even when I was too far away to remind you. With gratitude, Justin Alvarez. Elena read the letter to the staff at the next fund meeting, her voice breaking slightly on the final paragraph. When she finished, the room was silent except for the sound of Morrison quietly wiping his eyes. This is why we do it, she said. Not for the headlines or the satisfaction of winning, but because every single person deserves to have someone believe them, deserves to have someone fight for them, deserves to matter. The fund's 1-year anniversary celebration was held at the same hospital conference hall where Elena had given her presentation while Vincent Cross prepared to kill her. The irony of the location was deliberate. a reminder that the same spaces where violence had been planned could be transformed into centers of healing and justice. Over 200 people attended, wrongfully convicted victims whose cases had been overturned, family members of people killed by Castellano's network, attorneys and advocates who'd partnered with the fund, and journalists who'd covered the story from the beginning. Marcus Webb gave a speech about his journey from wrongful conviction to freedom to becoming a voice for other victims. "I spent 3 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit," he said. "I was angry for a long time after I got out. Angry at the system, angry at the cops who framed me, angry at everyone who didn't believe me. But Major Kovac taught me that anger without action is just poison you carry around. She showed me that the best revenge is building something that prevents the next person from suffering what you suffered." He gestured to the crowd. "Everyone in this room has been touched by injustice in some way. We've lost years to wrongful convictions. We've lost loved ones to corrupt violence. We've lost faith in systems that were supposed to protect us. But we're still here. We're still fighting. And because of this fund, because of the work Major Kovac started, the next victim won't be alone. They'll have resources, they'll have support, and they'll have a fighting chance." The applause was thunderous. Elena spoke last, standing at the same podium where she'd presented 18 months ago, while a hired killer aimed at her heart. "I want to tell you about the moment this all started," she said. "Not the night Derek Ramsey pulled me over. That was just the catalyst. The real beginning was the decision I made while standing beside my car in handcuffs, watching him plant evidence. I had a choice in that moment. I could accept what was happening, take a plea deal, move on with my life, and try to forget. Or I could fight back with everything I had." She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd, survivors, all of them, people who'd made similar choices when confronted with injustice. Fighting back wasn't rational. The odds were against me. I was alone, facing a corrupt cop backed by an entire department. Any reasonable person would have said the smart play was to cut my losses and accept a lesser charge. But I learned something in combat that served me well in this battle. Sometimes the smart play is the coward's play. Sometimes you have to be willing to risk everything to stand for what's right. She smiled, feeling the weight of the past 18 months and the lightness of having survived them. Derek Ramsey is in federal prison serving 45 years. Lawrence Castellano is serving 6 life sentences plus 240 years. Lieutenant Dietrich and 17 other corrupt officers are in prison. 273 wrongful convictions have been overturned. Dozens of families have been reunited. Communities are healing. And all of it started because one tired nurse refused to accept being framed. Her voice strengthened, carrying to every corner of the room. So my message to anyone who's facing injustice right now, anyone who's been told to accept their fate and stop making trouble, fight back. Find your evidence. Build your case. Connect with people who believe you, and never, ever let someone else's corruption become your shame. You are not what they accuse you of. You are not the lie they tell about you. You are the truth you carry inside, and that truth is stronger than any badge or any amount of money or any corrupt system. She looked directly into the cameras recording the event. To the Derek Ramseys and Lawrence Castellanos of the world, to anyone who thinks they can destroy innocent people without consequence, we're watching, we're organized, we're funded, and we will find you. The age of unaccountable corruption is over. Justice is slow, but it's inevitable, and it starts with people who refuse to be victims. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. When it finally died down, Elena stepped away from the podium and into the crowd, shaking hands and hugging survivors and accepting thanks that she didn't feel she'd earned, but that clearly mattered to the people giving it. Torres found her near the end of the evening, a glass of champagne in his hand and a satisfied smile on his face. "Final update on the Castellano network," he said. "We've now identified and arrested 42 corrupt officers across 6 states. The investigation has expanded to include federal officials who were taking bribes to look the other way. It's going to be years before all the trials are done, but the network is completely dismantled. They're never putting it back together." "What about the victims, the ones we haven't found yet?" "We're still reviewing cases. Could be another 100 wrongful convictions we haven't identified, but we're looking and we're finding them. Everyone who was hurt by this network is going to get their chance at justice." Elena raised her glass. "To justice, then, messy and slow and imperfect, but still better than the alternative. To justice, Torres echoed, and to the woman who refused to let corruption win. They clinked glasses as the celebration continued around them, a room full of survivors and fighters and people who'd looked at injustice and said, no, not today, not to me, not anymore. Elena left the event around midnight, walking to her car through the hospital parking garage where Vincent Cross had parked 18 months ago while planning her murder. The space felt different now, just a parking garage. No threat, no danger, just concrete and fluorescent lights and the echoing footsteps of late-shift workers heading home. She drove through Millerton streets, past the police station where she'd been booked, past the courthouse where Ramsey and Castellano had been sentenced, past the storage facility where a criminal empire had been cataloged and destroyed. The city looked the same as it had that night when she'd been pulled over, but everything had changed. Her phone rang as she pulled into her apartment building, the same apartment she'd lived in before the arrest, though she could have afforded anywhere in the city now. Colonel Hendrick's name appeared on the screen. Elena, I saw your speech tonight. Watched the whole event streaming online. What did you think? I think you've become exactly what the military trains people to be. A force multiplier who makes everyone around you stronger. You didn't just get justice for yourself. You built a system that provides justice for hundreds of people. That's leadership. I learned from the best. Yes, you did. But you took those lessons and applied them in ways I never imagined. I trained you to save lives on a battlefield. You've taken that mission and expanded it to saving lives from corruption and abuse of power. I'm proud of you, Major. Elena felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Thank you, Colonel. That means more than you know. One more thing. The Army is considering recommending you for the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the highest non-combat decoration we can award. For your service in combat and for your post-military work exposing corruption and serving justice. If approved, it would be presented at the Pentagon by the Secretary of Defense. Elena was quiet for a moment, processing. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept it if they offer. Say you'll let us honor the example you've set. Because soldiers and veterans across the country watched what you did, and you reminded them that the values we swear to uphold don't end when we take off the uniform. I'll accept. And Colonel, thank you for believing me when this started. For making the calls that got me Marcus Blackwell, for standing by me when it would have been easier to distance yourself. That's what leaders do, Elena. We stand by our people, always. After they hung up, Elena sat in her car for a long moment, looking up at her apartment building and thinking about the journey from that terrible night to this quiet moment of reflection. She'd lost months of her life to this fight. She'd been threatened, framed, slandered, and targeted for murder. She'd faced down corrupt cops, dirty lawyers, criminal masterminds, and a justice system that didn't always live up to its name. And she'd won. Not just for herself, but for hundreds of people who deserved better than what they'd been given. She went upstairs, unlocked her door, and found herself in the small apartment that had been waiting patiently for her return. Same furniture, same photos on the wall, same life interrupted by corruption and then reclaimed through relentless determination. But she wasn't the same person who'd left for a double shift at the hospital 18 months ago. That Elena had been tired, focused on her work, living a quiet life of service and routine. This Elena had stared down the worst the system could throw at her and emerged stronger, clearer, more purposeful. She made tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights and thinking about tomorrow. There was a shift at the hospital starting at 6 a.m. There were fun meetings in the evening. There were always more victims requesting help, more cases to review, more fights to pick with people who thought corruption was acceptable. The work was never done. Justice was an ongoing project, not a destination. But tonight, in this quiet moment between battles, Elena allowed herself to feel something she hadn't permitted in 18 months: peace. She'd been underestimated, dismissed, targeted for destruction by people who thought a badge and money made them untouchable. They'd learned otherwise. And in the process, she'd become something they never anticipated, not a victim to be pitied, but a force to be reckoned with. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed with a final message of the night. She picked it up and saw it was from Marcus Webb. Just got word. My official exoneration certificate came through today. Completely cleared, record expunged. It's like the conviction never happened. I wanted you to be the first to know. Thank you for everything, Major. You gave me my life back. Elena typed a brief response. You gave your life back by having the courage to trust us. Enjoy your freedom. You earned it. She set down the phone and returned to the window, watching as a police cruiser passed on the street below. Once, that sight would have made her tense. Now it just made her thoughtful. Most cops were good people trying to do a difficult job, but the system that protected the bad ones needed constant pressure to maintain accountability. That pressure would come from people like her, like Marcus Webb, like everyone who'd been hurt by corrupt authority and chose to fight back instead of accepting injustice as inevitable. The work continued. Tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, for as long as people needed someone to stand between them and those who abused power. Elena Kovac had spent 8 years in combat zones saving lives under fire. She'd spent 18 months in a different kind of war, fighting corruption with evidence and determination and an absolute refusal to surrender. And she'd won both battles the same way, by remembering that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. By staying true to her values when the easiest choice was to compromise. By believing that one person standing up for what's right could make a difference, even when every institution seemed arrayed against them. She finished her tea as the city settled into the small hours of morning, that quiet time between midnight and dawn when the world feels like it's holding its breath. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victims seeking help, new fights against people who thought they were above the law. But tonight, Elena sat in her apartment and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction for battles fought and won, for justice delivered, and for a system that, while flawed and slow and often cruel, could still be forced to work when people refused to accept injustice quietly. She'd been dismissed as a tired nurse driving home alone. She'd become the woman who brought down an empire. And she was just getting started.